Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host, John Webster, and with me, as always, introduce yourself, Jared.
Hello, it's me, Jared Kozel, and yes, we are back a little bit earlier than planned. We made a whole big to-do about going away for a month, and here we are for a impromptu stream on a very special occasion for both of
Yeah,
us.
we couldn't help ourselves, I'm not sure what to expect as far as how many people actually know that we're streaming. The people. Oh, we've got Danny here, so there's at least one because I did post in all the usual places, but this is a sort of late announcement, and we're on a different day and time. We're actually this is interesting because I had been talk. I had a talk with our good friend, Mr. Stephen Stark, who uh, I, I've done a few things with. So some of you might know him. He is. There's been sort of this gradual change over at Here Be Dragons, where he's focusing on Dungeons and Dragons content, which I am not exactly. That's not exactly my thing. So I've been stepping back a bit from that, though I'm more than happy to still, pop up on the channel whenever, he wants me on there to discuss something tangentially related to like movies and TV and all that stuff. But as part of that, he has decided to move the day and time of his stream. So I believe he's doing it on Tuesdays now. So he said to me, if you guys are interested, Sunday at 6:00 is open. And I talked to you about it, Jared, and we thought we'd give this a shot. And originally we thought, hey, that's a great way to start off our new year when we come back from the month break. But it so happens that today is the special day that you alluded to. The 20th anniversary of a little movie. I'm going to see if you all have heard of this. It's called The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. It's very like it's an unknown gem is what I like to call it.
Yeah.
And so it so happened that Jared got back from his trip yesterday, and I'm not leaving until Thursday. So I was like, let me give Jared a ring and see if he wants to get a jump start on our, a new day and time and talk about this very special movie. And I didn't have to twist your arm, Jared.
No, you did not. This is what we in the business call a sneak preview. So it's I wonder if Kate has seen this movie.
I know she has seen it because a watch party that we did was her first viewing of this movie.
That's great.
So I have evidence of that, and it's funny. And I always remember about the watch party where I said to Kate, I kind of warned her because we were watching the extended versions. I'm like, this is sort of the slowed down, more like not leisurely paced, but not as like fast paced as the theatrical cut of the movie. Because I always like to sort of brace first time viewers if they're going into the extended versions to realize that it wasn't the cut that went out into cinemas, and it's a bit of the filmmaker just letting the film be what it wants to be. And I remember we were like partway through the movie, and she was like, "This is the slow version." And so like that I always look at that as a lesson of, what, don't worry, the movie takes care of itself, even in the over 4 hour version. So yeah, but no, I'm glad we got a couple people here because I know this was probably a bit of a surprise to people doing it now, but yeah, Oh, and by the way, speaking of Mr. Stephen Stark, he will be joining us in a bit, tentatively. He's got some stuff going on, but he's going to pop on for about an hour, I think, if all goes according to plan. But in the meantime, Jared, before if I start talking, I'll take over the entire stream, and at the end of 4 hours, it'll be like, you have any comments, Jared? so I'll start off with you. Like, how did you come to Lord of the Rings overall, and what are your sort of memories of the experience of Return of the King?
So I was introduced to Lord of the Rings in the form of the book series by my father, which is, I think, how a lot of people come to these stories. Is their particular story like this that's been around for since the 1950s as kind of a generational pass down. But my dad, while he's not at quite as plugged into like hardcore lore or anything like that, he loves fantasy and sci-fi stories, and this was one of his favorites. So he would read them to my sisters and I at bedtime when we were, I forget exactly how old, but I couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. And I have enduring memories of we started reading The Fellowship of the Ring, and one of my sisters, Jordan, always fell asleep just because it was late at night and she was young, during the first chapter, but she always wanted to hear the same thing. So we ended up reading the first chapter of Fellowship of the Ring at least 5 or 6 times before we could get to the rest of the book. But it was, that's such a great first chapter and introduction to this world, obviously with The Hobbit as well. And so we all fell in love with the books and everything. And when I heard that the movies were coming out, this was an era, because the Fellowship came out in 2001 when I would have been 12 years old. So I'd already started watching and loving movies, particularly Star Wars movies, Disney movies, but I wasn't really what you would call a fan of cinema at that age. It was just like, I like that movie and that's a good time and that's fun. But The Lord of the Rings were one of the first movies that I truly remember being like truly excited for, after maybe like the Phantom Menace in 1999. There were a few others, yeah. but I still vividly remember, after hearing that The Lord of the Rings was coming out, seeing like the first teaser poster. I think it was just like the Fellowship trekking up the pass of Caradros. It was like a big wide shot, and it just said Lord of the Rings, December 2001, and I hadn't gotten to that part in the book yet, but it was just vivid. And seeing Fellowship in the theaters at 12 years old was just such an overwhelming visual experience. But I was just head over heels in love with it, and every subsequent movie became just kind of that much more of a rite of passage, kind of like December was the month to go see Lord of the Rings, and it was for a long time. And by the time Return of the King rolled around, like I couldn't have imagined anything I could be more excited for at that age.
I want to pause you right there, because I do want to ask, was this the poster you remember?
I think that was one of the key arts. I don't think that was the exact poster.
Yeah, not the exact poster, but I wondered if this was the image.
Yeah, it was one of the images I remember. Yeah, it was, and it's just, it's such vivid iconography right there that, you can, even if you haven't, seen the movies or know the story, that these characters are on a journey, an epic journey, and you want to join them on that journey. And the journey that these movies take you on is honestly probably one of the greatest in our Western canon of stories, film or, literature. And I also mention it in terms of like my introduction to the wider realm of cinema, because not to get run away with it, but these movies are the reason I care about the Oscars, because I had no damn idea what the Oscars were at that age. I just heard that when Fellowship was up for the Oscars, I was like, well, obviously it's going to win. It's a competition for the best movie. The Fellowship of the Ring is the best movie.
That will never heal.
And it was nominated for 13. It won 4, but it didn't win that year. It lost to A Beautiful Mind, which I hadn't seen at the time. But they weren't quite ready to embrace it then. And then The Two Towers, I'm like, we get rolled. I'm like, well, this time they'll give it to The Two Towers because it's the best movie, and this is a competition for the best movie. But no, it was nominated for 6 and only won 2. Peter Jackson was snubbed for that one, which is woof.
That reminds me of the year before when Fellowship was up and Moulin Rouge was also nominated, but Baz Luhrmann was snubbed for director, and Whoopi Goldberg, when she was like introducing the segment for Moulin Rouge, she was going on about all its like wonderful qualities and the story, the cinematography, the music, and then she capped it off with, and all of this apparently without a director. and that's the way I felt about The Two Towers being snubbed for best director.
Yeah, but the saving grace, such as it were. I mean, I think they should have won all 3. But when it came to Return of the King, it was such a culmination, and it was a coronation in more ways than one. Because at this point, everyone knew that was going to win, and even having been burned twice, I'm like, this movie's going to win, and it won a record. It was nominated for 11. It won a record 11 as a sweep. And not that it needed that validation, but that was one of the cases where it's just like, yes, it deserves every single one of these and possibly more, because it still didn't get any acting nominations somehow. But I honestly, I don't even care about that anymore, just because this was such a perfect validation and culmination of this epic journey that I was just awash with joy with seeing the movie, with seeing everyone in love with it, with seeing it win all these awards, and for the fact that the movie itself told the story it wanted to tell in complete form and reached the ending that we all wanted it to reach, literally in terms of the exact ending that we get in the book. And it is such a towering achievement that, over time, sometimes when you look back at a movie, you're like, okay, well, that movie was more of its time. These movies are timeless. And this one in particular, as the years go on, I don't get less enamored with what an achievement this is. I get more enamored, because seeing these movies, even compared to some outstanding movies that are coming out to this day, this movie still clears them all. And if you consider these movies, as some do, these 3 movies as one long movie, then this trilogy clears them all. Even diehard Star Wars fan that I am, and passionate devotee of the original trilogy that I am, I think I might have to acknowledge that Lord of the Rings is probably the single greatest movie trilogy that we have, because these are 3 of the best movies that we have of any genre, of any type, of any era, period. So love them dearly. And Return of the King is the one at the end that I whether or not anyone has a personal favorite of the 3, sometimes I think Fellowship is mine, but Return of the King is such the crown jewel that you just can't do anything but just feel like my heart just sings whenever I think of it. It's the best.
Yeah. I don't think I'm gonna. Oh wait, there it is. I wanted to pull up just because we were talking about the Oscars, and this is really the real joy of that night is because, you know, we'll save it for another stream. Our talk of, you know, our listening enthusiasm for what the Oscars stand for and how much they mean or whatnot. But there's no denying it was like a euphoric night. But this is the real joy of that night, which is when they all went to the OneRing.net fan party afterwards, and you see the love of all the people in the crowd and them up on stage. I occasionally go back and look at those videos on Torn's YouTube channel, and like the interviews and stuff, and it's so fun, like watching John Rhys Davies give his interview where he's like, 11 awards, not bad. And he goes, you know, nothing for the actors, but what are you gonna do? So and of course, like I think I was in tune to the Oscars like a couple years before those movies were up for nominations, and so that carried through while Lord of the Rings was up for all those awards. And I do remember there was some noise about Sean Astin potentially being nominated for Best Supporting Actor that year, and that didn't come to pass. And that, you know, that did sting at the time, but when you look at, and so did the lack of like a cinematography nomination, and I think one of the sound categories was snubbed, but they were nominated for 11. They won 11. That you could not have a more resounding, like, just what's the word I'm looking for? Just swell of support for the movie and the trilogy. So, so that's fine. But it's funny that I'm always still a little bit bitter about Fellowship at Two Towers, regardless. And it's funny, now we know how that stuff works. Like Two Towers never would have won because it was the middle chapter, and you know, if they decided at that point that they wanted to award the trilogy, which I think they did, I think the fact that it got in for Best Picture that year was a sign that they wanted to award eventually the whole trilogy. And so Return of the King then was always going to be it. But I just remember being like, really? Beautiful Mind in Chicago? Come on. Yeah. But yeah. I do say I won't. I'm not going to dwell on this, so I'm not putting those comments up, Panar. But I will acknowledge you know, that there's, you know, some moments that, you know, as you know, he feels it as some of the most powerful moments, but then also some moments that don't quite work for him, and that's fine, you know. But that's I think, you know, we're not going to dwell too much on that on this stream, because this is, you know, our 20th anniversary celebration. And for me, I love it all. I mean, I have been picky in the past, and like when push comes to shove, if I look at the trilogy, there's like some little moments where I was like, well, I would have tweaked that. I would have done this a little differently, but I've never dwelt on any of that, because this more than any of the other like movie sagas, like I just like, I turn it on and I'm awash with tears. Yeah. And it just overwhelms me. So and I always say nothing's perfect, but these movies are damn close. So
yeah, no, they're people, when you talk about like a perfect movie or a perfect adaptation, everyone's going to have different criteria. And if your criteria is absolute fidelity to the letter of the source material, then frankly, no movie is going to do that, just because of the inherent differences in the art form. Like there are certain elements, and perhaps we can talk about it later. For instance, like if like I've read and listened to Tolkien scholars and cinematic experts, and if none of them have cracked this, if anyone can manage to tell me how they could have successfully adapted, say, the Scouring of the Shire into this movie. No one has been able to do it to provide a good answer to me on that front, so I don't think it's actually possible. But it's one of the things where the spirit of the trilogy and the spirit of the story and the love and the craftsmanship that was poured into this entire endeavor of making. Oh yeah, we'll talk about that scene, because that Theoden's charge on the Pelennor is probably the single most like thrilling scene I can think of in movies, perhaps. But it's what I was just saying is that when it comes to adapting a story, like, you really have to look at the spirit and the intent of it, and allow for differences between mediums. And if you do that, you will see that this trilogy is really one of the greatest labors of love in the service of one of the all-time great stories that you could ever find. And the fact that the fact that it exists at all would be something to celebrate, even if it was a little bit more flawed. The fact that it exists and it is this great and it's this almost universally acclaimed, with everyone having their own quibbles here or there, it's astonishing to consider that they did this, and they did this 20 years ago, which is part of the reason that we're here. Like, when we didn't quite have like some of the techniques that would have theoretically made making a movie like this quote unquote easier. But that's part of the charm. These movies, even though they're timeless, they came out at like a perfect time, because
look at that. Yeah. That is just I stand by the fact, I've heard a couple of people say that you can see, the seams and in the visual effects, and I guess to a certain extent that's true. Like, there's shots that even back in 2003 where I'm like, if they'd had just a little bit more time to polish that one shot, but they were severely overworked with these movies, just because they were kind of inventing a lot of this stuff as they went along, because this was Weta Digital in its infancy. But I still like, I think what I find so breathtaking about a lot of the visual effects is, and the reason why I think they still hold up, is because, and I think maybe because they knew that as a company, they couldn't necessarily like compete with the likes of ILM for photorealism, but so many of these shots, like, as it was mentioned about the charging of the Rohirrim at Pelennor Fields, when you get that big wide shot of all the horses, it almost looks like a painting, the way it's conceived and executed. And I feel like that's what kind of makes the visual effects of this movie like stand up so well. It's almost, a lot of these visual effects are almost more impressionistic than, trying to, it's not that they don't look real, they do, but there's just something very, and because their inspiration comes from the art of John Howe and Alan Lee, like, there's just that sort of artistic quality to them that makes it look like, you could pause a frame of this movie and hang it up on the wall, and it's just the most beautiful piece of art you've ever seen. So, and I think that's part of why visually these movies continue to hold up even after 20 years. My godmother just saw these films for the first time. When was it? It was earlier this year, when I went to go stay with her, and one of the things she said was like, these were made 20 years ago. They look amazing, and so that makes me happy that people coming to these movies for the first time now, that the movies still look great to them. That that they haven't aged in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And Petar, and by the way, like I'm also not being harsh on you. Don't worry. It's just I have done the stream on this channel, which was, in fairness, also a love fest, but it was like at least a 4-hour stream, and I believe I did talk about things that I have that I could pick apart, little story stripped elements, things that maybe weren't as polished with the rewrites that the films went through and stuff, and so I acknowledge that those things are there, but it feels like for this stream I'm just gonna gush. So I will acknowledge that there are things that that like I said, I don't think any movie is perfect by except for maybe for me Amadeus is a perfect film. But aside from that, I don't think any movie is perfect. So but I don't begrudge you having any small issues with the movie. But I do think we came for me, I know I came on today for just a gush fest, so I apologize. This is not going to be the objective stream of Return of the King.
Yeah, no, and it doesn't have, like, when we say something's a celebration, that doesn't mean we are wanting to silence criticism.
No.
It's part of the it's part of the natural conversation about movies, even movies that we love dearly. It's just that there could and there have been entire separate discussions about, for instance, the nature of Lord of the Rings as an adaptation, and and different choices that different filmmakers, had they been given the opportunity, might have made in bringing the story on the page to the screen. And like we all have our own strong feelings about that, but I just kind of feel like, in terms of the overall spirit of someone loving this story and the collective effort it took to bring something like this to screen, and to have it become as wildly successful and widely beloved as it has, like, it's really kind of an unimpeachable achievement in my eyes, even if there are things that people might feel could have been done a little bit differently. But that, as you say, that kind of stuff kind of happens on the margins, because the entire reason that we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of this movie as the classic that it is because in its entirety, this movie just is one of the reasons that we love stories, not just film stories, but stories in any medium and art in any medium, because it's just that special.
Yeah, take your time, Steph. We'll be here for a while, so you don't have to rush, but we'll be happy to have you on whenever you're ready. Yeah, and you know what? I'll give one to to the crowd. Theoden running off of the Minas Tirith is never going to be realistic. Not Theoden. Did I say Theoden? I meant Denethor. Denethor running off of the tower, especially in the extended cut. Like that's it. It really is kind of hilarious when you think about how far he would have had to run. But that is what we call poetic license, because it is a beautiful visual image. But but anyway, so there, I've given one to you all. But then I even capped it off with saying why it was good. Did you notice that?
I did.
No. I'm trying to think of even I'm trying to think of even where to go, because like everything in this movie is just. I mean, I guess I'll talk a little bit about my experience of like when I saw it. Like, there is no explaining to people who come to these movies years after the fact what those 3 years were like, as a fan, as a moviegoer. And maybe it's because we didn't have social media like we do now, and so I wasn't aware of the existence of people's whose like life wasn't consumed by Lord of the Rings. But it did kind of feel like, like the world was caught up in Tolkien fever, for those 3 years. Uh, and I was I'm trying to think if I don't think like I was an active like forum user on the OneRing.net, but there were a couple like smaller Tolkien message boards that I belonged to. So like that was the prism through which you were viewing what was going on with the world, and watching like all the TV interviews on late night, and and the premieres, and then watching those extended Lord of the Rings DVD documentaries, each year leading up to the movies. It just felt like, everything was just Lord of the Rings all the time, and I was the happiest person in the world. And so by the time Return of the King came along, I remember I actually went to a late night showing with a lot of my work friends, which in itself is a commentary about how big this had gotten. They kind of, I was the butt of the joke at the news station I was working at when Fellowship came out, because I kept going on and on about this movie that, like, before it came out, if you weren't a Tolkien fan, it was just sort of this thing that was over on the peripheral, and it just wasn't something people were concerned about. And then by the time of Return of the King, it was this event. Like, even my coworkers who weren't really into Lord of the Rings, they were like, we should probably go see this, because it was such a huge event. So I do remember going with all my coworkers at midnight to see it, and just, what an overwhelming experience it was.
Yeah, it's such a like great point that you bring up about the fact that when you started the experience, people were a little bit kind of looking at you with side eye that you were so excited for this movie, even though it's based on one of the most popular and enduring, pieces of literature in the Western canon, even if it is fantasy. But that's part of the thing, is that when it comes specifically to movies, the Lord of the Rings movies are what effectively, and this may be a generalization or an oversimplification, but in a larger sense, it's kind of true. These movies are the reason that, like, fantasy went mainstream.
Yeah.
Because in the past, like, when you think back to, some of the movies that we love, but like fantasy movies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I'm kind of excluding Star Wars, because even though I do consider it fantasy, a lot of people think of it as science fiction, and that's...
Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, Stephanie. But, like, just to throw it out there for something, when people think of things like, sword and sorcery, which Lord of the Rings is doesn't exactly fall into that genre, but when people think of 80s fantasy, they think of something like, I don't know, Willow, which I love Willow, but that's very, very 80s fantasy, or something like, Excalibur, or something along those lines, where people find it easy to silo off into a different genre. But the Lord of the Rings movies were so big and so like successful, and the cinematic craft was so well done, that it almost like compelled people who thought of themselves as only fans of real adult cinema to take these movies seriously. It like effectively took a, charging Mumakil to whatever brick wall they thought they built around the idea of serious adult movies. And it just destroyed them, because this movie was not only a serious adult movie, but it was an epic fantasy story, and it appealed to all ages, from, as young as you were to get into a PG-13 movie, to people who had been reading the original Lord of the Rings books back when they first came out. These movies, I should say, got everyone to care about this story, and in turn opened their minds to the idea that fantasy stories could actually be something that was not something you had to put aside as a childish thing as you grew older. Because for like the Lord of the Rings books themselves have been lauded in that way, but it's just an unfortunate truth that with books, not everyone reads the books, and like there are so many books that even a story like Lord of the Rings, it's never going to be like the same kind of cultural event because the books already came out. But with the Lord of the Rings being a focus of a cultural event at this time, it got people who would not otherwise care about this kind of fantasy stories to care, and it inspired people to fall in love with one of the best stories of all time. So that's another reason why these movies, and Return of the King in particular, bringing it home in such amazing fashion as it did, is why these movies are still beloved and being discovered and loved anew 20 years later.
Yeah, I think just the fact that Return of the King was seen as a resounding success, artistically and in every other way, and that people loved it, it shows like how well executed everything was, because third chapters are hard, y'all. In case we didn't know this, it's really tough to bring a story home. And yes, the book was already written, so like that roadmap was there, but all the more reason why it should have, like, it was probably hard to execute it in a way that like fully captured the emotion and the power of that resolution to the story, and the fact that it was so amazingly well received that not only was it like one of the biggest box office successes of all time, I think like at the time it was, at least worldwide, it was like the number 2 highest grossing film of all time, behind Titanic.
Yeah, so this movie ultimately made $1.1 billion.
Hi, Steph.
Hey, Steph.
Sorry for being late, guys. I've had a very hectic day.
Oh, that's fine. We're just honored that you're here.
Yes, be honored that I am present.
No, welcome, Steph. We were talking before about how it's funny. We're doing this with your permission, of course, that we're actually streaming at what used to be the Here Be Dragons time slot.
I gave up this time slot because my Sundays are typically very hectic and have been for a while, and I finally got to the point where I'm like, nope. And so I filled up my Sunday with other stuff, and then Jen's like, you want to come do this thing? And I'm like, sure. Forgetting that I had filled up my schedule with other stuff.
I did feel guilty about that. I want you to know that.
You should. Fine.
We've just been sort of, I don't even know that we've really delved into the movie even yet. We've just sort of been gushing about our experience, with Lord of the Rings and the third film coming out back in 2003 and stuff. We've had you on I've had you on to talk about Lord of the Rings before, but it's been a little while. So like, what was just your experience coming to these movies?
Okay, so what my experience coming into the movies was, I had not read The Lord of the Rings. I had osmosed much of it through nerd culture in general. But as I've said before, like, I learned what an orc and a warg was from Dungeons and Dragons, not from Tolkien. I've been a D&D guy my whole life. But I will say, like, as somebody who's always been a fantasy guy, D&D nerd since I was 9, I heard you guys reference Star Wars a minute ago. I do consider it, like space opera, science fantasy. It's got science fiction elements. It's got a lot of fantasy elements too. Um, Tell me a Rancor isn't basically a dragon type monster. Tell me a Jedi isn't a space wizard, But when the films came out, I felt like this is what I've always seen in fantasy that has made me love it. And I'm really glad there is a high quality realization of that type of entertainment so that other people can go, I get it now. So, yeah. I mean, I loved the films themselves, but I think one of the things that they really did was help other people understand what I loved,
Yeah, I do remember, especially when I saw Fellowship, just sitting in the theater, I remember feeling like how real everything felt in a way that fantasy on film hadn't before. And because we all had grown accustomed to stuff like Conan the Barbarian, Willow, which are movies that I love.
Both of those films.
Yeah, but it did keep fantasy at arm's length from
it was always
from the mainstream.
A little bit not serious. Like as much as I liked Conan the Barbarian, it's a little cheesy and over the top. As much as I liked Willow, it is a little bit like, shall we say, dumbed down fantasy. It's very like family friendly.
You could even say it's a dumbed down Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways.
Kind of, yeah. But like these films specifically, the aesthetic, the visual aesthetic and the auditory aesthetic that they brought to it really like elevated it to a new level. Kind of in the similar way that Star Wars did back in 1977. I mean, I don't want to make this about Star Wars, but that's like my old school love.
I think there's only so much Jared will be able to stand of that.
Yeah, I know, Jared. Calm down. I know how much you dislike Star Wars, but like the sound of a TIE fighter, the sound of a lightsaber igniting, the sound of blaster bolts, the John Williams score, like all of those things work together to elevate what's honestly kind of a cheesy story in the original Star Wars into something fantastic. And ILM did a lot of work making the things look really good, creating new technologies to make that happen. I feel like Lord of the Rings did a lot of the same thing. It's like the bigatures that they made, the level of detail that Weta put into all the costumes and all the props and the special effects, the mocap for Andy Serkis, they were inventing new technologies to elevate the storytelling, which is why Star Wars resonates 40 years later and why these films resonate 20 years later.
Yeah. You mentioned Weta, and like, I can go on about the different people who were invaluable to these films. Howard Shore comes to mind, Andy Serkis. Really, I mean, I could just list all the actors. Richard Taylor, though, of Weta, is like that man has been responsible for so much like wonderful beauty on film, to the point that like I know opinions differ on James Cameron's Avatar movies, but I think one of the things that can't be denied is the beauty of the world that's created in those films, and so much of that is down to Richard Taylor and the Weta Workshop, who actually make all these things for real and actually design them before they're digitally created in the computer. So I think he's one of, I wouldn't say he's an unsung hero because so many Lord of the Rings fans especially know and love him so much. But it does feel like he is one of the most instrumental parts of why these movies feel so real and lived in. And plus he's got that wonderful New Zealand accent.
Right. Hey, you can't go wrong with that. And if I may wax poetical for a moment about this specific movie, like The Return of the King, because I mean that's what you're like. I know it's impossible to talk about one Lord of the Rings movie at a time. It is, but I do want to talk about Lord of the Rings specifically. I've said it before. My favorite of the trilogy is The Two Towers.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could throw a dartboard and pick a great movie with throw a dart. I once saw an online poll like which is the best Lord of the Ring movie, and there were thousands and thousands of votes, and it was literally split perfectly evenly between the three. I'm like, you know what, that tracks. We all have our favorites. They're all fantastic, but this movie had a lot to live up to. This is the one that could have ruined it all if they didn't nail it. But obviously they spent a lot of time and effort, everybody involved did, to make it happen. But I'm sure that there's a lot of movies out there that people spend a lot of time and effort on that don't land. And for this one to bring the trilogy home to such a satisfying end, some people will complain there's 7 endings or whatever. No, it's thoroughly making sure you understand everything that happened after.
And it's wrapping up, once you factor in the extended versions, it's wrapping up an 11.5-hour movie.
Right. Give them the 45 minutes to make it all, to put a bow on everything.
Yeah.
But, so this movie, when I watched the films the first time, it was my true introduction to the full story. Okay. I have since read The Lord of the Rings, but I only knew like orcs and throw the ring into Mount Doom and Frodo and stuff. I didn't really know the story before the films. And there were some times where I was like, I don't understand why this decision is being made. In retrospect, I do. But I think the big one is the Paths of the Dead. That feels like such a left turn to me. Narratively, but in hindsight, it's part of the hero's journey, that trip through the underworld, which, let's be honest, Aragorn does a couple of times, actually. A few characters go through that sort of thing. But it's that sort of destined king thing that's part of that story. So I understand why it has to be there. Feels weird to me still when I think about it from I'm going to construct a story. It's not what I would have my hero do in the middle of the third act. You know what I mean? But still,
well, and that does go to because it's even there in the books, although much more is made of why they're going in that direction because of the Corsairs, which is especially in the theatrical version of the film is kind of glossed over.
Mm-hmm.
You don't totally understand it, but even so, it is even in the book, it's kind of a left turn, and that again goes to Tolkien just breaking all the rules of narrative fiction.
And to be honest with you, I'm a storyteller. I'm a D&D guy. I play a lot of D&D. I run a lot of D&D. It's my job. So I'm constantly trying to build narrative all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the things that Paths of the Dead teaches me is it's okay to take a left turn. It really is. If it's in service of the broader theme, it doesn't have to hit the story beats and be quick and efficient. No, it's as long as it's telling us something about our characters, it's totally great. And it really does do that thing. It establishes the bravery of Aragorn to go into that. It establishes him as there's been talk about him returning, the return of the king, but ultimately it is in the Paths of the Dead where he truly takes hold of that. I am the king. Come fight for me. I am the one that you owe your fealty to. I am the one that can release you from your curse. And I don't know a better way to do that other than taking this wild left turn in the middle of Act 3.
Yeah, and I always do love, not that we don't have that by this point, because we've established the camaraderie between the three hunters, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, but I do like that it gives another moment of like, yeah, you could go off by yourself, but no, we're in it together, buddy. And so it further establishes that.
Yeah. And sorry, Steph. Oh, I was just going to say, to your point about like it being a moment where Aragorn kind of truly embraces his identity as the king of Gondor and the one who will ultimately, be the light that stands against the darkness and unites the worlds of men. The way that the movie is structured, if we want to talk about it in terms of why the purpose it serves in this film and regarding the larger story, it really is the kind of the culmination for him of accepting that responsibility because of the change they made back in the first movie, where they make Aragorn across the trilogy up until this point far more of a reluctant hero, and that's a little bit different from the way Tolkien wrote him, specifically because Tolkien kind of had an idea that, there are certain people, there are certain kings, who are inherently great men and are going to be able to take up the mantle when that time comes. And while Aragorn, has his past traumas and has, specifically related to his nature as Isildur's heir, I believe in the books, he is a little bit more like, okay, it's my time. I'm ready to claim this mantle. And that's one of the reasons I think he gets Andriel earlier in the books than he does in the movies, where here they save it specifically for this moment before he enters the Pass of the Dead and has Elrond come to bring him Andriel himself, because this is throughout the movies, Aragorn, while he's been incredibly heroic, like incredibly badass, very committed to the cause of life and the cause of, the world of men and the cause of the destruction of the ring, he has been a little bit more reluctant in his personal quest for a number of reasons. And one of those is, there's a scene in the extended cut that was not in the theatrical version, but before they depart Rivendell, Aragorn visits the statue of his mother. And, he has that moment where Elrond is talking to him about his power. And Aragorn just kind of says, I do not want that power. I have never wanted it. But he ultimately knows he will have to take it up. But as we see throughout the movie, that's kind of the journey that he goes through with Boromir, where Boromir starts to recognize this ranger might become the great king of men. And that's where he starts to ultimately gives him that incredible, I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king moment. And then Aragorn, takes up the cause in the second movie of uniting the people of Rohan and leading them against the certain death that's coming for them. And, the whole, then I shall die is one of them speech. And so he's clearly willing to die and give his life for this cause, but hasn't been ready to take himself to the level of king yet. And this is the moment that he has to, because if he doesn't, then Gondor will fall. And also, as they give an additional stakes, to tie it through with the love story that they have throughout the trilogy, if he doesn't, Arwen will die. So this is the moment. This is truly his moment to claim that mantle and fulfill his oath fulfill his role as Isildur's heir. And the fact that he has to do it by uniting this group of people who had once broken an oath to Isildur and been cursed forever, that just lifts it up to the level of like mythic grandeur that justifies the, one could argue, possible non sequitur of all of a sudden there's a ghost army now. Mm-hmm. But thematically it works.
Which feels out of nowhere. Again, like it breaks so many narrative rules to be like, our hero is going to go off on a side quest in the middle of the third act and get an army we haven't seen before, and it's going to be our Deus Ex Machina. But like, I also am aware that in the course of the book, it's built up a little more, and like that deep history is already there. So you might be able to guess what's going to happen based on all the lore that you don't get from the film itself.
And there's also the fact that which I argue I don't think they could have gone away with in the movie, because it would have required too much explanation, too many more characters. But in the book, the Army of the Dead is used to like take over the Corsair ships, and that's it. And Aragorn also has an army of rangers, and I think Elrond's brothers or sons show up. Yeah, his sons. And so like that just would have taken up way too much real estate on screen. And it's much simpler to say he's already got an army of the dead. This is a fantasy movie.
Right.
Let's just have him use that and take that army to Minas Tirith.
Right. The Battle of Five Armies happens in The Hobbit, not in The Lord of the Rings, even though there would be five armies there: Army of the Dead, Army of Rangers, Gondor, Rohan, and then the orcs. Yeah, crazy. I didn't realize. A couple of things I wanted to make sure I mentioned. One, my favorite and least favorite part of this film happen moments apart. Okay? My least favorite part of this specific movie is Legolas parkouring across a Mumakil. Okay? I don't like it. I wish it didn't happen. Okay, great. I can move on. Best part is it still only counts as one. Like, that line killed me when I heard it the first time. I died laughing. So, like, it's obviously give and take, and there are some people who love that scene. It to my eye, it doesn't play with physics. I know he's an elf, blah blah blah. We've had this conversation before. I'm totally willing to overlook a bit of what I consider spotty CG in what.
Although I've seen people who say that they think the entire thing is CG, and that's actually not true. There's a number of shots in there where it is Orlando Bloom. But no, that's valid. I'm not going to take that away from anybody.
Oh, no, it's not flawless. Oh no.
But that I'm glad you mentioned that stuff, because that, like, these movies, even though they are taking fantasy and this world incredibly seriously, that doesn't mean that they're like, deathly serious. They're hysterical at times. And that line you mentioned might be, it's in the running for the single funniest moment in the entire trilogy.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, there's a difference between making a comedy and making a drama where one of the characters in that drama has a sense of humor. Like,
and I will say that is one of the biggest laughs that the movie gets. The entire trilogy gets. I remember sitting in the theater and the entire audience just erupting in laughter with that line. So
yeah, and it's a joke. And one of the reasons it works so well is because it's a joke that's been building over the course of 3 movies in terms of both the relationship between Legolas and Gimli and their friendly rivalry, specifically related to trying to see who can kill more orcs in these battles, and the fact that Gimli himself is always a little bit more on, like, Legolas seems like he could kind of take or leave it, but Gimli is so invested in this competition, the fact that he sees Legolas pull off something that should literally be impossible, and he just is absolutely floored and stunned, but it only takes him a moment to just cut back to the whole, it's like, I thought it was only one Mumakil, and one of the things that I always joke about in my kind of undercutting of that moment in terms of Gimli is like, yes, it was only one elephant, but he did take down that entire platform on top of the moon. Kill how many dudes were on that platform? Like 20.
Too. I'm with you. The Oliphant is like it. The Oliphant is one, but
yeah, no, I just.
And I want, if I may, Potter has brought up like the bowing scene. My friends, you bow to no one. Beautiful. And like the Merry and Pippin charge, yes, but like how earned it feels by that point. How like the first movie, they're basically just yokels that are bumbling through everything. And then in the second movie, they go through some real hard times and have to figure things out. And then the third film separates them and forces them to be heroes in their own right. And so that by the time we get to for Frodo and Aragorn turns and charges, and the first two people to follow him before Legolas and Gimli and Gandalf and anybody else is Sam and Pippin, or Frodo, or come on, Merry and Pippin. I was like, I'll get there eventually. I'm just got to name every Hobbit I know.
Well, and I remember because that when I saw that in theaters, like when they charge before everybody else does, that gets a big laugh too. But it's not just a laugh and oh my God, it's funny. It's like a release in all this built up tension, and you're so proud and overjoyed at how far those two little hobbits have come. But they're the first ones out of the gate following Aragorn.
But those two, like they really had to earn it. Like,
yeah,
if that scene had tried to come even at the end of the second film, it wouldn't have really felt believable per se. But no, they had a really rough go, and they had to like dig deep to find their true bravery and their internalize some of that heroic quality, so that they were like, it's on, let's go for Frodo. God, I just had another scene because Potter said, like, I can't think of anything that hits as hard as those two scenes. So, like, the end.
I'm still not over his earlier.
Yeah. We're not going to even discuss that comment, but like I would say Sam. Sam is my favorite character in this trilogy. Okay, and he does have a couple of, like, he's got a great his speech at the end of movie number 2, Two Towers. About like there's something worth fighting for in this world. That's the one that gets me. But also the like, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Oh, yes. Wow. Oh my God. Yeah. I'm giving myself goosebumps just like thinking about it.
I just remember being like so blown away because it was on so many levels. It's like, because like there can be a line written in the book, and I believe that line in some variation is in the book, but film does something so completely different, where you can just build up the emotions with the performances and the music and just the filmmaking, the editing. And so I just remember being hit by like a ton of bricks with the emotion of the scene, pride in Sam, but also as someone who had been following the production of these films for all those years, there was also that part of me deep down that was like, fuck yeah, y'all, you freaking nailed this moment.
Well, it helped that they picked really good actors.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, the cast of these movies, not primarily the core cast, but especially when you consider the extended cast, it's almost flawless in terms of like major speaking roles. I'm hard pressed to think of anybody in these 3 movies who is like a substantial recurring character who I like don't think that they're like absolutely like perfect, casting. there are like maybe one, like if you want to indulge in meme culture, there might be like one or two like background extras who have like one awkward line reading that make you go like that guy. But like in terms of like the top, I don't know, like 20, 25 billed actors, like they're all perfect.
I agree. Not just the nine, but like Elrond and Arwen and Eowyn and Eomer and Theoden and Grima and Sauron and Denethor and Faramir. Like everybody is bringing their A game, which is like, I think most actors want to do a good job, but given the like inherently collaborative nature of the filmmaking industry, like all you can do is show up and do your best and hope that it works out in the end, you know?
Yeah.
Because most films live or die in the editing room, really.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least that's my sort of impression.
Yeah, and it's something that I constantly go on about these movies, is that because I've seen it time and time again, you know, it's just a hazard of following the production of so many movies that I'm looking forward to, and all that. It's like there's a lot of times when all the ingredients are there. This has the potential to be something amazing, and then it falls flat for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's time to breathe. They cut it off too soon. They linger too long. The music doesn't carry it right. Yeah, I'm with you. There's a million reasons why a scene can fall flat.
Yeah, and it's just sometimes there's just this bit of magic that happens, and that is these movies to me. Like, and also like beyond what they could even control. I go back and I rediscovered like how many fortuitous things happened when there was a book that came out a couple of years ago. I forget what it was called. It was something like Peter Jackson and the Making of Middle Earth or something, and it was basically like taking you through the journey of the production of the Lord of the Rings, and there were so many things that like happened just by accident, and you're like, damn. And so I don't know, sometimes something just happens with certain projects.
Yeah, sometimes you just like, you get actors that understand their characters in a way. Like, man, I mean, I did stage acting when I was in high school and stuff, but like watching the way these people embody these like sweeping epic characters, like there is a point in the film where Aragorn screams his lungs out, and I would be like, man, what an actor. I would believe, if you told me he broke his toe when he kicked that helmet, I would believe you. He acted so well.
Wait,
Sorry,
did that happen? I've never ever heard of
Oh,
that
I've never heard that.
You didn't know that? Like one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse of watching Lord of the Rings with someone for the first time. Did you know that in blah 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 in this scene?
I will say this. I think John Noble plays Denethor as written astonishingly. I do understand the criticism that Denethor as a character is not as fleshed out as the character as he is in the book. That there's more shades to that character, but I don't hold that at all against John Noble, who I think like his job in that movie is to be like a despicable, horrible father, you know,
to chew up the scenery and maybe a tomato or two,
and like but he's so good. Like the way he delivers lines is just so delicious, and
like a juicy ripe tomato.
And the fact that he could jump from this to then he was Walter Bishop in Fringe, who I adore with all my heart and soul. It's just a testament to what a great actor he is.
Yeah, still haven't seen Fringe. Sorry. Yeah. I understand it's a good show.
That's all right.
No, but it's a great example of John Noble's range, because here he plays an incredibly despicable father figure, and in that show he plays a much like kinder-hearted but still like tortured father figure with a darker side.
And also a terrible father in the other universe.
in the other universe, but yeah, but I did want to mention two things. One, specifically regarding John Noble's performance as Denethor. I agree. As he plays the character as written, pitch perfect, and I do think that if there is fault to be found in Denethor, it is specifically with the way they portray him, because the element that gets removed is the fact that, like Saruman, he is effectively in the book, it's established he's been using Minas Tirith's Palantir, kind of like Saruman, and has been corrupted by Sauron, not to be his servant, but then essentially Sauron is showing him the absolute enormity of the evil facing them and just drilling out any semblance of hope from him. But the movie kind of omits that in favor of playing up his grief at the loss of Boromir and how it affects his relationship with Faramir, and the fact that it's, he does love Faramir, but he can't, show it because of his grief, and because of the way that Faramir is less like him than Boromir, so he has trouble relating to him in that same way. But it ends up making him a little bit more it makes his sudden turn towards Faramir, and his grief at Faramir's apparent death, like, feel a bit more sudden, and it makes his like total descent into madness feel a little bit more, strange. But it, again, as performed, Denethor is, John Noble does an outstanding job, and that dynamic that he has with Faramir gives us some of the best scenes in the movie. Like you mentioned in passing, Steb, that kind of joking, moment where he is like chowing down on the tomatoes. It's, in the movie, it's one of the most haunting and devastating sequences in the entire film, and it's not from the book.
Right.
That is a construction of the way. Elements of it are like the song is from the book, but having Pippin choose to sing it in that moment, in that context, as Faramir is going off to retake Osgiliath on Denethor's orders and presumably going to his death, like the way that is framed and the way it's intercut, it leaves you just like devastated and enraged, and like by the end of it, you're just like completely spent.
As somebody who has spent a lot of time dissecting and analyzing adaptations of various types, like that is one of the strengths of an adaptation, is to show you something you couldn't get from the other medium,
Yeah.
And that characterization of Denethor in that scene especially is very, as you say, haunting, with his last son riding to his death, and Mary singing that very sad song over it all. But at the same time, like, I assume there's some conversation about wishing that he'd had a little more fleshed out. I don't know that I agree with that 100%. I mean, I would have to see the difference in order to understand it. But there is something to be like, one of the things that Lord of the Rings, and by extension Dungeons and Dragons, because it's grown out of a lot of that similar ideas, one of the things that it does is it allows you to like, here are the good guys and all the evil stuff is in this one thing, and we can destroy evil. But in this adaptation, if Denethor gets to where he is because of pride and grief, not because he was corrupted by some evil magical thing. And I actually find that to be a positive from an adaptation standpoint, like, because not everything can be boiled down to the evil is in that ring, and if we destroy that ring, everything will be fine. You know, if we take out the big bad evil guy at the end of our D&D game, that's it. Everybody's good and happy. It's just not how the world works. And I know
Yeah,
fantasy, and like I get it. I totally get it. But I also like that in an adaptation, you can make these tweaks. You can make Aragorn more of a reluctant hero because that is what we're relating to right now, culturally.
yes. That was a major thing that I talked about with my one of my teachers at the time. He was my TV production teacher, actually. When I mentioned that, we were talking about the first film, and I said I found it interesting that Aragorn is a reluctant hero in this, and I had been introduced that term by him because he talked to us a lot about story structure and character arcs and things of that nature. And he said, well, yeah, and just look at the different times in which these stories were made. The Lord of the Rings published back in the 50s, and these movies coming out in the early 2000s. So you have the audience expecting different things from their heroes.
Yeah, the definition of hero changed. Like,
yeah,
pretty unequivocal that Aragorn is kind of positioned to be the traditional hero, but a lot of modern audience say like the real hero of the movie is Sam. And I'm one of them, you know. Yes, Aragorn is also a hero in his own right, but like I think modern audiences want a hero that like Aragorn is awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's kind and gentle and kick-ass and rough and tough and caring. Like, he is kind of like the perfect man, if I may. But like, everything is pretty easy for him. Like, fighting is easy. You know, like, he doesn't in a dangerous situation, he is competent and capable. And so it's less a measure of his bravery when he is in a dangerous situation than it is for somebody like Sam, who doesn't have any clue how to protect himself, but he's got to go anyway. Which I think is why we love the Merry and Pippin running off at the end. They're not really warriors. They have the slightest inkling of what they're doing, but they have internalized their bravery and their personal heroism. And I think we as a society like that. I saw you furrow your brow when I said everything is easy for him, because it's obviously not. I noticed Jared specifically like, is it though?
Yeah.
And of course it's not.
Yeah, no, but I get what you're saying in the sense that with Aragorn, you know, he is a great, you know, he is like, even if he were not the future king of Gondor, he is, you know, a ranger of the Dunedain who is an incredibly skilled and has he's a great fighter and speaks multiple languages and has an immortal elf princess who is in love with him, and you know, so he is not one of us in the same way, and I feel like you're absolutely right that like the hobbits kind of fulfill that role. That's why they're ultimately the central heroes of the stories, because for Tolkien it was, you know, even the smallest person can change the course of the future, and in this case it is the hobbits who are responsible for the ultimate victory. You know, everything that Aragorn does, as impressive as it is, would have meant nothing if Frodo and Sam hadn't managed to do what they did, what only they could do, with a little assist from Gollum.
And I think the only reason my brow may have furrowed is because I actually think that's very much the case for Aragorn in the books. I think we're meant to feel like everything comes easy for him in the books. I mean, not necessarily. Maybe there's it's. I'll even admit it's been a little while since I've read the book, so maybe I need a refresher on that. But he's so very confident in the books. So I feel like the movies take pains to to change that up, where we see that there is a lot that's difficult for him, and overcoming, certain obstacles. So. So I think that's the only reason my brow may have furrowed, because I feel like they went a different direction for the film, where there is a lot for him to overcome in that sense.
It's adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Adapt,
But it's interesting what you were saying though about Denethor, because I never really looked at it that way, and probably because so much of my thinking of these films and the comparisons of book to film are probably still stuck in, like
the lore from the books,
or 17 to 19-year-old John, who was seeing these films for the first time and listening to people say, well, that's not the way the character was in the book. And so I don't know that I've ever looked at the changes in Denethor's character from the viewpoint of 39-year-old John, and what kind of characterizations and writing he likes in his stories. Because I think that looking at it from that viewpoint, I think you're right. I actually think the version of Denethor in the film, don't attack me, anybody, but I think you could definitely argue that it's more interesting because it exists outside of the control of an all-powerful evil force. This is a man that's going through grief, and had a lot of issues even before that. And that's the source of all of this, this turmoil with his son. And I think objectively speaking, you could definitely make the case that that's a more interesting arc, even if it's not true to the book. I'm not going to argue with anybody who feels otherwise, because I learned a long time ago, don't argue with Tolkien purists.
I mean, ultimately, I'll be like, if you want it exactly as it is in the book, go read the book.
Yeah.
That's not what this is.
Yeah.
In the book, you don't get sweeping visuals and music over the top of it.
Yeah.
You don't get that. You get to build it exactly as you want in your head, but it's the give and take. And that's why, I'm pretty forgiving with adaptation, as long as the flavor is the same. And let's be honest, I think Tolkien would be very happy with these films. I mean, he changed stuff in his narrative all the freaking time.
Yeah.
He rewrote The Hobbit, and his book of unfinished tales is just a bunch of stuff he kept writing and then changing things and rewriting and editing and retconning, and okay, great.
Yeah.
But his ideals for Middle Earth never changed, and I think all the makers of these films understood that theme and those vibes that he was trying to bring across, and I think they nailed it. I do.
Yeah. No, this is really we when we talk about making adaptive choices to suit the medium, it's this kind of stuff. It's not just plot mechanics, it's character dynamics. We had mentioned earlier about making Aragorn a little bit more of a reluctant hero. That's not only to serve the narrative, it's to serve his personal story, and it's so we can relate to him more, making him less of the always great man who will come into his destiny, and more of a the man who's rising to meet his moment, which is something that everyone can relate to, especially as you mentioned, Steph, Aragorn really is kind of represents an almost the masculine ideal, because he is strong and powerful and intelligent and brave, but he's also, he's sensitive, he is caring, he's empathetic, and he really doesn't have what anyone would consider the quote unquote toxic traits of masculinity, unless you consider the simple fact that he is of royal blood and to be like that, which I don't. But one of the reasons he's an interesting contrast to Denethor is, in that early scene in Fellowship when Gandalf tells Elrond that as in men we must place our hope, men here being the generalized term for humans in
Humans,
particular. It's, you know, and Elrond is kind of dismissively like, men are weak. And, you know, and he says that because he, from what he's seen, he thinks men are, as they said, scattered, divided, leaderless. But when you think about the human characters who we get to know throughout the course of Lord of the Rings, most of them are actually like, they're conflicted, but most of them are actually pretty, you know, like stout-hearted in the end. We have Aragorn, who we've discussed. We ultimately have Boromir, who is, you know, is tragically flawed, but ultimately is heroic, and he's a character who I actually find very incredibly relatable, and why his sacrifice is one of the most like devastating moments through the.
I think Boromir is one of the most obvious examples of where they took something in the book and immensely improved it, because and that also owes a lot to Sean Bean's portrayal.
Of course. And Faramir, I know some people have some issues with his adaptive choices in the Two Towers, but I like specifically the fact that he is a little more susceptible to the ring than he is in the books, which I actually think is another smart adaptive change. But specifically, you know, Faramir is ultimately a very virtuous and good-hearted man as well. And then you have Éomer, who is, you know, very brave and loyal. Éowyn, you know, a woman, not a man, but, you know, as a human, also incredibly heroic, incredibly valiant and brave, who has one of the absolute best moments in the entire series. And then Theoden King, you know, Theoden is very proud, very stubborn, but he's ultimately, you know, heroic. Denethor is kind of the one major human character we have who really kind of embodies the fallibility.
Wormtongue. Please do not.
Wormtongue. You're absolutely right, Steph. Wormtongue kind of split my. Wormtongue is just like Wormtongue and Denethor, but they're different kinds.
They are different kinds.
Wormtongue is much more of the servile kind of creepy.
Now, Wormtongue is a great example in the story of toxic masculinity.
Yes. But Denethor is much more of the idea of, like, you know, he is effectively king, even though he's actually the steward. But he represents, you know, the fallibility of power. And when we see, like, and when we hear them talk about, like, how when Sauron, the deceiver, gave to them 9 rings of power and corrupted them, you know, blinded by their greed, they took them without question. You know, like, the idea is that no one can resist the ring, but it really is kind of embodied in men like Denethor, who would be particularly susceptible to that kind of influence, even if in this case they've removed that element from his character, because, you know, men can be plenty fallible even without these eldritch forces of evil weighing on their minds. You know, Denethor, and like that's not to say Denethor is entirely unsympathetic, you know, but he is a man who has made bad choices and is effectively leading his people into ruin. And so we see that he is ultimately not the worthy leader that the world of men needs at this time.
Yeah. Oh, never mind. I had a thought.
Okay, I've got thought.
And then I had a senior moment. And
I've got thought. So
okay, go ahead.
One of the overarching things of the whole themes of the whole story is that in everyone there is the capacity for good and evil, and we see that from pretty much every major character we see along the way, with very few exceptions. Like Legolas gives into despair a little bit at one point. Gimli is untrusting and racist, at least early in his story. Never trust an elf. You know, the hobbits have to learn not to be. Can we curse on your stream?
Yeah, I already said the F word. So
okay,
go ahead.
Shitheads. You know, they gotta learn to get over that stuff. So, and like even Sam is tempted by the ring, not deeply tempted the way some people are, but it still is there. And Denethor, we have to see at least a couple of people give into their baser nature to understand that that's like the dichotomy that they're displaying here. But when I think about, especially the three characters of Aragorn, Boromir, and Sam, right? You could say they're all three heroes in very different ways. Aragorn is the person we all wish we were.
Yeah.
Sam is the person we're like, that's me. I am not the brave ranger from the north. I'm the fat gardener who's in over his head. Boromir is the one we're all afraid of accidentally becoming.
Yeah.
You know, he is the cautionary tale. Despite the fact that he has a very heroic end, you know, like he still arrives at that place. Like he comes to his end in need of redeeming himself. I would argue that he does in fact redeem himself at the end, but like the call of power is seductive and dangerous, and we see that for almost every character in the show or movies.
Mhm.
They're movies, right? Yes,
They are movies. There's a show too, but it's different.
yeah. It's only okay as far as I'm concerned. We'll
Yeah, we'll stay off off that so we don't,
I'm not
downhill into disagreement.
It's only okay as far as I'm concerned.
It's a different story.
It's a different story. But yeah, like, I don't know. I really do love this movie trilogy. Not obviously to the same level as John or maybe even you, Jared, but like, there's no mistaking that this is a masterclass in storytelling because of how they take well-established tropes and put them in the story and pay them off in interesting ways or flip them on their head, or like they don't flip it on its head, but they carry it through to a satisfying conclusion. Like, tropes are not bad. Lazy tropes are bad.
Yeah.
It's just as a for instance, like in a lot of stories, Eowyn would be a tough macho lady. I just want to fight, and she wants to fight, but she has her softer, gentler, feminine moments, true vulnerability, and like that's where you take the action girl trope type, and you if all you do is like write her like a man but give her boobs, like that is a horribly written character. But Eowyn is a fantastically written character. Not Eowyn. I like Arwen popped into my head for a minute. I'm like, oh no, did I get it wrong?
Well, and that's even done all the while. There's a story point where she's disguised as a man, but her feminine qualities throughout the story are still, shining through. And the ultimate, I'm not sure. In the movie, she keeps her helmet on, but I will say in the book, it's a point that I like. I'm trying to remember. I think she does. I think she takes her helmet off, and her line is something to the effect, "No man am I. You look upon a woman." Eowyn's say,
she does it. She does it in the movie too. She saves the helmet takeoff for the precise moment before she can.
You're right. She does. But it's such a just awesome moment. Just claiming her power in that moment, and yeah, I love it. It's
well, John, me.
So
I can only stand to stream for about an hour.
I know, and
I get scatterbrained, and it's just like, yeah. I think I'm reaching my end. Is there anything else you would like to talk about with me before I salute you and leave?
No, I just want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, no problem, man. And just also and I know you've been in the middle of a lot of change with what you've been wanting to do with Here Be Dragons, I just, I've said it to you before, but I'm in complete support of that. I'm glad you're looking after yourself, man. But I am still always very eager when you have something like, you wanted to talk about Fallout, like I am always game to hop on whenever you want me. So
likewise, man. When you guys get ready to do Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, oh my gosh, just let me know. I'm there. I promise.
It's shameful that hasn't been done already.
I know. I think we would have done it some time ago, but you know what? Since you waited, we're going to get Jared for it too.
And I'm also going to hook AR into joining us for that one, because they've been wanting to do that for a while as well. We had that on our list when they were my co-hosts.
Yeah, when they were your co-host 2 years ago. I saw that movie in the theaters in Chinese 4 times when it was first released. So, and I've seen it several times since. I love that film. So yeah, hit me up.
Will do. And thank you so much for everything, for being such an awesome friend, Steph. I love you, man.
I love you too, brother. And our lives changed. You're doing this. I'm taking our old channel in a totally, not totally different, but like I'm doing a lot of D&D stuff now, which is not your thing. And you want to do the deep dive cinema stuff for 5 hours at a time, which is totally not me either, But I'm glad you got Jared, because Jared is just like you in that way.
Oh my God, it was just so funny because everybody watching is in the Slack, so they probably already know. But it just cracked me up when we got done talking about Oppenheimer a couple weeks ago, and it was like an over 4-hour stream, and I posted that in the Slack, and your response to him was just like, "You're crazy."
Yeah. Yeah, we used to go for 2 hours, and I would get like antsy by the end of it, Yeah. So I just I know where my limits are. I'm like, I've been totally good, but I can also tell that it's time for me to start wrapping it up. But yeah, John, Jared, guys, thanks for having me, man. This again, love this movie, love the trilogy as a whole. Congratulations, 20 years later to Best Picture winner, Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. And I'll see you guys the next time you've got something that I have something to say about. Okay.
Cool. All right.
I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
All right. Yeah, I'm so glad he was able to join us.
So am I.
It's so great, and I realized like how much I miss talking movies with him, because it's been a while now. We talked about the Fallout trailer a couple weeks ago, but that's different from doing a film discussion. But yeah, so
Do you want to? Is this like our de facto mid roll, effectively?
Yeah, let's do that, because that'll allow us to put a button on that segment of the stream, and then we can start with not necessarily second half, but we'll see. I wasn't necessarily planning for tonight to be one of those ultra long streams. So
we're gonna keep this one under the runtime of the movie. So
it still gives us a lot of time, though.
It does, but we won't. I can't approach the 4-hour mark today. So.
Yeah, no. And that really wasn't my plan anyway. As a matter of fact, if Steph ended up staying on with us another 20 minutes, I probably would have just had us wrap it up at the 2-hour mark, but we'll see. So tonight has been a surprise, because we weren't supposed to be streaming this week, but we are still planning to have our big official comeback on the first week of January, tentatively on I guess the 7th. which is going to be, we're going to be keeping our new date and time. So it'll be Sunday nights at 6:00 as opposed to Saturdays. Doing that because I kind of wanted to start, as far as the time is concerned, I kind of wanted to push it a little earlier because it did feel like maybe the later time is keeping some people away. And also the fact that streaming on Saturday nights, I know that people are busy. So when Steph brought up the possibility of us moving into the old Here Be Dragons time slot, I thought, sure, let's give it a go. And plus, this means I won't be super tired on Sunday mornings, and maybe I can catch Coffee Club in the on the Here Be Dragons Zoom. But yeah, so anyway, so all that is to say, we'll be back first week of January on Sunday the 7th at 6 p.m. And as far as I know, we're still planning to talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So give that a rental if you haven't seen it yet, and join us for that discussion. I've been watching it a couple times since I got the 4K Blu-ray, and it's got a beautiful music-only track on there with John Williams' score, which I'm very happy about, because not quite sure if this is going to be his last one or not, because he keeps saying that he's retiring from film music, and then he writes another score. So so we'll see. The longer he wants to push off that retirement, the happier I'll be.
Yeah, I do think that this is going to be his last of what we would consider his classic, the ones he's probably most famous for. Like, I don't think he'll do another Star Wars score. I don't think there probably won't be another Indiana Jones movie, so I don't think we'll hear him do that again. Really, the only thing I could see him coming back for is if Spielberg really wants him for whatever Spielberg's next movie is, because I think he'll go for whatever that man has cooked up. But I think that this feels like, I'm glad that John Williams got to do all 9 of the Star Wars theatrical movies. I'm glad he got to do all 5 Indiana Jones movies, and it's a beautiful score for to culminate a very fitting final chapter, I think, in the legacy of one of our all-time great cinematic characters.
They just need to push up the eventual La La Land's Records expanded release of the score, because the existing album is way too short. We're not going anywhere yet, Pat. We're still going. Hell will freeze over before we cut this off, at least before the 2-hour mark. That is just like, there's going too long, and then but there's also underserving a movie like this, and that just would not be conceivable. I don't know, anything else, anything you wanted to throw out there before we jump back in?
No, just once we come back in January, our hope is to do this a little bit more regularly. Like, we had had a couple of unplanned breaks since you relaunched the channel, and most of that was just scheduling and logistics. And there may still be some of that, because I'll be starting a new job in the next calendar year. But I'm still thinking I should have, weekends and everything. And my plan will be to, try and be here as regularly as possible. And that's good, because as I think we alluded to on the Oppenheimer stream, John and I have discussed a number of both movies and projects that we want to do in the new year in terms of, discussions on this channel, including a number of things in the world of J.R.R. Tolkien. So,
yeah, I will say, though, I'm really glad that the opportunity arose for us to do this today, because it felt weird not marking December with something Lord of the Rings related, especially with it being the 20th anniversary of Return of the King. And this worked out perfectly. So So I'm glad we're doing this. Yeah, no, I do want to, once we come back next month, the intention is very much to, not to say like I won't like insert some breaks here and there, because I do want to be careful that I've made the mistake in the past of burnout. And I'd like to still avoid that, but I also want to have a, for the most part, regular schedule. And going to start trying to get the word out there a bit more about the channel and the streaming. And which, by the way, for you guys watching, I'd also, it goes without saying, if you're watching this and you're somehow not subscribed to the channel, please do so. But also, I'd appreciate any help you guys can offer in terms of, maybe tweeting out the streams when you see them, maybe or doing some retweets and things of that nature, just so people know about the channel. And we were doing pretty good a couple of years ago with views, and but now we kind of have to work on rebuilding an audience, which I get, because the pandemic's not quote unquote over, but people have gone back to like pre-pandemic activity levels, and so I know it's a little harder for people to tune in, but we'd like to try and build our numbers if possible. Well, I'm not going to say the other thing, Pattern.
It's Elon Musk's vanity project, which I don't blame anyone who wants to get off that website. I'm still there. John is allegedly still there, but we do tweet out the link to these discussions, and we also post it on Blue Sky. Those are kind of the two where we're most active. So if you happen to be there and you happen to enjoy these conversations, and you happen to want to just hit the little retweet button to try and get a little bit more circulation, that would be appreciated. But don't sign yourself up for that hell site unless
no. Yeah, no, I'm pretty much there just for the purposes of announcing a new stream and getting the word out, because unfortunately there's still that's still one of the number one ways to get eyes on anything you're working on at the present time. But also posting on Blue Sky, as you mentioned, which is a nice, it has been a nice place to sort of settle into, because most of our friends are there. So, but yeah, just any help you guys can offer in terms of helping to get some more viewers would be appreciated. All right, let's dive back into this incredible movie, which start with the second half with putting up another poster for the film, because one isn't enough. So this was the teaser poster for the movie, which I remember very fondly, because this is like the bookend to the teaser poster for Fellowship of the Ring, which had Frodo holding the ring with a very similar background. And like we are going to talk more about the movie. I don't want to backtrack now into just we spent like the first 40 minutes of the stream talking about the build up to the movie, but I do want to say, like, one of the things that I love most about my memories of these movies coming out were the incredible promotion that New Line Cinema put into, with the posters, the trailers, which were pieces of art onto themselves, all the TV spots. I worked at Fox at the time, and I just remember like using the tape decks at the station and like rolling a tape on an entire like 4 or 5 hour block of Fox, just so I could fast forward through and look for Lord of the Rings commercials. But yeah, it was a hell of a time. And I'm kind of sad that New Line Cinema isn't still around in the way that it was. It technically is, but it's just a sort of glorified subsidiary of Warner Brothers, and where it's pretty much just the name that exists at this point. Because I feel like if it was still the studio that it was at the time when these movies were being made, can you imagine the anniversary celebrations like there would have been for all these movies? It would have been huge, but oh well. Anyway, so diving back into the actual movie. So we talked a lot about like Aragorn, Denethor, all that stuff. I really do want to we'll take our cue from the way Tolkien lays out the story and spend a bit of time now with the hobbits, Frodo and Sam and Gollum, who we haven't talked a whole lot about yet. First, I just have to say, because Stev did say, and I know there's a lot of people who agree with him that through their eyes, Sam is the quote unquote hero of the story. I still Sam is like one of the big heroes of the story, but I'm still of the school of thought that says that Frodo is the hero of the story, because he doesn't make it all the way, but being a part of being a hero is sacrifice. Yeah. And I think he sacrifices a lot, and he puts himself out there where, he's prepared to not come back from all of this. And in a lot of ways, he doesn't return the same person he was. And Elijah Wood's performance as Frodo is just stunning. I always just think of, how lovable he is throughout, this story, the innocence that he has. And then to watch him turn around with that dead stare on Mount Doom and just say, the ring is mine. And it's just so heartbreaking. I think that he is probably, again, you can't say anybody in these movies are underappreciated, but I don't know that he always gets the due that he deserves, because he's just so phenomenal.
Yeah. No, it's an astonishing performance by Elijah Wood, and I personally think he should have been Oscar nominated for the first movie. I kind of get why people gravitate towards Sam, especially in the last movie, because for Frodo's journey, you really have to look at it across all three films for him to be fully established as the hero, because he is the ring bearer. He is the one who ultimately, did what no one else could do, took on the burden no one else could take on, and successfully got the ring where it needed to go. And as I joked about online, he was about to fumble the ball on the 1 yard line and let Sauron run it back for a middle ending touchdown. But this is why you invest in the offensive line, to literally push you over the edge. In this case being Sam carrying him up and Gollum knocking him over. But in all seriousness, the reason I think that Sam's heroics stand out so much in this movie is because Frodo has taken on such an incredible, heavy burden. It really, by the time we reach the start of Return of the King, it has started to take its toll. And he doesn't get the opportunity to do some of the more conventionally heroic things. He is very tired. He's weakening. He's becoming more angry. He's becoming more suspicious. And some of the, and that's the ring's influence, but it results in him, for instance, ultimately being susceptible to Gollum's manipulations and taking out his suspicions and fears on Sam and sending him away. And then by the time he realizes a mistake, he gets poisoned by Shelob and is unconscious, and Sam has to save him. And then by the time they reach Mordor, he can barely walk, but he keeps putting one foot in front of the other. He's still doing the task. It's just that Sam gets to wield the sword. Sam has to literally carry him up the steps. So if you just look at Frodo from this movie, I can see why you're like, well, Frodo is just, Sam's doing all the work, but it's not actually the case. It's just that Frodo's struggle is an internal one. And at this point, it's kind of hard for us to visualize just how much of a heroic act it is that he is still carrying the ring at all and still is ultimately himself, even if he is almost unrecognizable from the joyful hobbit who started this journey. And it's because someone of a lesser character than Frodo would have succumbed to the ring's influence long before this.
Yeah, the fact that he gets to the very edge of Mount Doom, and only then succumbs to the ring is astonishing. It shows like you said, the strength of his character, his bravery, so I guess, and I love Sam. I adore Sam. I agree. If you just look at, especially Return of the King, he has all the heroic moments. He makes me weep with, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. It's when I wanted Sean Astin to get that Best Supporting Actor nomination, and if he had been nominated, I really think he would have been caught up in the clean sweep, and he would have won as well. But I just take issue with people who, if for you Sam is the hero of the story, great, that's amazing, but it's usually at the expense of Frodo. Frodo wasn't the real hero, and it's yes, he was.
And the idea is at the end of Two Towers, they have that conversation about songs and tales, and Sam is trying to laud Frodo, and Frodo kind of rightly turns it back around. It's like, you're leaving out an important character, Samwise the Brave. Frodo wouldn't have got far without Sam. And it's true, without Sam, Frodo never would have made it to Mount Doom. But conversely, I think one could argue, Sam might not have made it without Frodo, because the two of them, there's a reason that we started this journey with 9, as a fellowship, even if the fellowship ultimately splintered. It's because this specific task was always going to be too big for any one individual. That's the entire idea of why the ring's malevolent influence is played up so much, and certain characters in the book who seem to demonstrate an almost flippant irreverence for the ring's power or an ability to resist it, like Tom Bombadil. I think Tom Bombadil was ultimately excised for a thematic reason, not a plot one. The idea that, the fact that he's immune to the ring's power really kind of undercuts the fact that it's the greatest evil ever to be created in this world. That's not to say he's not an important character, but just for the story the movie's telling, it's kind of hard to reconcile that. And specifically with Faramir in the Two Towers, Faramir resisting the ring quite easily in the book, and in the Two Towers adaptation being a little bit more pulled to it by his desire to prove himself by his father. I think that that's actually a smart adaptive change, because it again underscores just how incredible it is that Frodo is managing to resist this object of ultimate evil. And we see that, the fact that Sam bears the ring for, I don't know, maybe like a day or two. And even then it starts to work its influence on him. He doesn't want to give it back to Frodo. Ultimately he does. But they really needed each other in order to accomplish this task. And they needed Gollum, because Gollum is ultimately the one who destroys the ring, unintentionally, of course. But speaking of the way these movies are structured, there's a reason that they chose to open this movie, Return of the King, with the flashback to Gollum's backstory, because this is the time of when we needed to have that information in the movie, when Gollum was ultimately going to be the reason that, as Gandalf said, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many.
And it's important to note that also, Sam does not. It's also Sam is not the one to destroy the ring. He's rendered unconscious by Gollum, and in this film version, it's the struggle between Frodo and Gollum that ultimately results in the ring being destroyed. In the book, Gollum gets the ring and in his glee is dancing around with the ring, and the rock cracks and he falls into the lava. Either way, it's Frodo's pity of Gollum, his sparing of his life, which is inspired by Bilbo's pity taken upon Gollum, that ultimately results in the ring being destroyed. And so it's not only about those proactive decisions being made at the very end of the story, but also what has led up to that. And Sam does not want to be pitiful to Gollum all throughout the story, and I don't think Sam on his own would have made the decision to take Gollum along and have him be a guide. And show him that pity, especially Sam in possession of the ring. I think that would have been. I don't think that would have worked out well for Gollum earlier in the story. But that's the thing. In a story like this, you don't have just one hero, one victorious person who is responsible for everything, because the fact that Frodo, Sam, and Gollum end up are able to get to Mount Doom and are there at that moment is also the result of the efforts of so many of their friends, from Merry and Pippin to Aragorn, Gandalf, and all the other members of the Fellowship. So I always fight against that notion that, Sam is the true hero of the story, because that makes it sound like there is just one true hero, and that's not the case. But I also understand why people say it, and especially because Sam gets so many wonderful heroic moments, especially in this third act. Padar, I am not going to enable you anymore, so you can keep making those comments, but I'm going to be much more judicious about what I pop up on the screen.
Although to single out one of Peddar's more serious comments when he points out that Gollum should have been nominated, specifically talking about Andy Serkis, yes, 1,000%. Because speaking of things that these movies did that are have changed cinema forever, Andy Serkis and his performance as Gollum and the way it revolutionized motion capture technology, most of the movies that we have seen today, would not have been possible without that kind of technology advancement. And it's an incredibly worthy performance on his own, because it's not computer graphics. Andy Serkis is doing that performance. He's actually crawling along those rocks and doing that voice and providing all the character moments that are being translated through the technology. But Gollum would not have worked without Andy Serkis. Frankly, we were saying that, if Gollum doesn't work, these movies might not work, because he's that important of a character.
Well, I think it's also important not to downplay how instrumental the computer effects artists were in translating that performance.
No.
but it is important to know, if you look at the CGI for Gollum in Fellowship of the Ring, in that small bit that he's on screen, you can tell a lot of differences, and it just would have been fundamentally different. And I don't think it would have been anywhere near as effective. And so that decision to go with motion capture and to really create this new kind of hybrid between, a true live action performance and computer animation. It's just like, we're still coming to terms with that, and like the effects of that, and it's just, you look at everything that like James Cameron has done with Avatar, and and then of course, obviously the Planet of the Apes movies where Andy Serkis played Caesar, which was a remarkable performance. And I remember being really happy that starting with the second film of that trilogy, they gave him top billing, because I felt like up till that point, there was this kind of attitude of, the actor's not really driving the performance, but when he was placed at the top of the cast list for the second and third movie in that trilogy, I felt like it was finally an acknowledgement that no, like there is an actor driving, this amazing performance that you're watching on screen. So yeah, it's, oh, hi Lady Starfall, welcome. So yeah, there's just no, and for my money, Gollum is still the pinnacle of all that stuff. I mean, and you can definitely see where they made improvements in the CGI, especially for like in The Hobbit and Unexpected Journey, but the performance drives Gollum in these movies, and it never ceases to amaze me. And I still remember when I first saw The Two Towers in the theater, and it was really that moment when Sam is dragging Gollum along with the elven rope. And I remember my mom whispering to me, like, my God, he looked so real. It was like, it was just like, unlike, because the only comparable thing we'd seen up to that point was Jar Jar from Star Wars, which was a remarkable achievement. But this was something else, because it was a character who wasn't comic relief, which, and we won't get into all that stuff about Jar Jar. I love Jar Jar. But it's undoubtable that he is, for the most part, a comic relief character, and Gollum was this thing to be both pitied and feared and entranced by. And I just remember, like, especially the end of Two Towers, when all of a sudden things get really creepy, and he's talking about, we could let her do it. Yes. And I remember one of the viewings I went to go see with one of my coworkers, he was like, we walked out of the movie and he was like, yo, Gollum scared the shit out of me. And yeah, it's just, enough cannot be said about what an enormous leap forward Gollum was, and still like one of the most important progressions of visual effects and like performance and artistry that there's ever been in cinema.
Yeah, and a fully realized character to complement the writing as well, both in the original Tolkien text and in the adapted script by Jackson and Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, is the fact that, like, the way that they choose to depict Gollum, showing the fact that he really is a character split between two halves of his nature as brought out by the ring, like that's an adaptive stylistic choice that is started in the writing and is manifested by Serkis's performance, because he gets to play so many different sides. He gets to play the purely id-driven, malevolent form of Gollum. He gets to play the sincerely tortured and also grateful Smeagol, the one that comes out when Frodo ultimately spares his life and shows him kindness. He plays the conflict between the two, and then he also gets to play Gollum playing Smeagol in this movie, where he's trying to put on the Smeagol-like face, but you can see that it's actually Gollum, even if Frodo can't. And that's just another layer on top of what was already an incredible performance that this movie.
And what they were doing with this film, and it was a very conscious choice, which was to you can almost. Gollum is so overt and so in your face that you can almost trust Gollum to be Gollum, but they made the decision to actually make Smeagol be the more duplicitous of the two in this film, because he's the one who's acting like he's very subservient and oh, we can't do this, no, and the fact that it is that climactic moment that's really just in the extended cut, but I think it drives home the entire character, which is when Frodo says, you promised, Smeagol promised, and then he just says, Smeagol lied. It's just so, oh God.
Yeah. And Smeagol is, by design, one of the most tragic characters in the entire story. Not because tragedy happened to him, but because, the ring destroyed him. And it destroyed him long before the events of this movie. As we see in the opening flashback, he had that in him before he fell under the ring's influence. He ultimately is the one who makes the choice to murder his own brother Deagle so that he can possess the ring. And there's Andy Serkis himself, who gets to embody that version of the character as well in this movie.
I will say it made me really happy when listening to the commentary. You hear that he was not only overjoyed to get to play that version of the character, but also in the end credits, when his name comes up, Alan Lee did both drawings of Gollum, but also Andy Serkis as Smeagol, and he said of that especially, he was really choked up about that.
Oh, that's sweet, because he deserves that recognition, because theoretically they could have cast another actor, but why would you do that? You cast Andy Serkis because he was an actor, rather than having just a stunt performer do Smeagol and having Andy Serkis do the voiceover. So let him act out that in all aspects. And the tragedy of Smeagol, and the fact that he murders his own brother to possess the ring, and then he for 500 years it poisons his mind, and by the time he loses it, as Gandalf says, he hates and loves himself. He will never be rid of his need for it. It actually, to tie it back to Frodo, it ties in thematically with that idea that we get to at the end of the film, the fact that even though Frodo has managed to survive this happening to him, he is so forever changed by what he went through that he can't stay in the mortal realm. He has to depart and go into the West, because that was the fate that awaited him had he not managed to destroy the ring. Was Gollum's fate, because unless or worse, if presumably at that point Sauron had found him and just ended his suffering, which may have for him been more of a blessing, even if it would have doomed the rest of the world. But the idea that Gollum, unfortunately, not every character gets a redemption in that way, because for Gollum, it was never possible. but this is about as close as it can be, because he does end up being the agent that destroys the ring in the end. And the fact that it happens through his kind of capricious whim is kind of a fitting grace note for his thematic journey, as well as kind of serving as a way for him and Frodo's paths to ultimately diverge, because Frodo being strong enough to resist the ring's influence for long enough allows him to have that fate of grace and passage into Valinor, whereas Gollum is consumed by literal hellfire. But in the end, he had his purpose, and so it was.
And Pedar brings up my favorite observation, which I'm trying to remember if I noticed it in my first viewing or if it was subsequently, but the fact that Gandalf does bring 3 eagles to the rescue, at the end of Return of the King, and just the fact that one of them was for Gollum, and it always gets me. Yeah, it's interesting about. I love what this film has to say about, pity and mercy, and the fact that Gollum begins his ownership of the ring with murder and hatred, and which not entirely his fault, because he's under the sway of the ring at that moment, but he doesn't have the inner strength to overcome that. And the fact that Bilbo begins his ownership of the ring with pity in his heart, ensured that he resisted, the ring for so long, that even as he had it in his possession, he didn't fall to darkness, for many years. I mean, ultimately, it was starting to have an effect on him, but not at the rate that it was with Gollum, just because of the differences in which they approached it. And it's the same for Frodo. Frodo had pity in his heart, and that's why he was able to resist the ring for as long as he did, making it all the way to Mount Doom. So yeah, I love that. But poor Smeagol, he's duplicitous. He's not a quote unquote good person, but he has always been probably my favorite character in literature, honestly, because he's so fascinating. And and every time that I read the story or watch the movies, I'm hoping for a more full redemption for him, and I'm like, maybe he'll make the right decision this time. But even that is not entirely, like, some of that is outside of his control. I think in The Two Towers he feels very betrayed by Frodo, when he's taken by Faramir's men, and he sees that as a betrayal, which at least in the films, I don't entirely blame him for. I think it's a misunderstanding of the options that Frodo had in the moment, but you can't really blame him either. And so it's just, so ultimately I do view his story as a tragedy, because I think the potential was there for improvement, and much in the same way that I feel about, and it's part of the reason why I really love this adaptation change in another story, which is Game of Thrones. Not exactly the same character, but I love the decision they made with Theon, and the fact that we get to see him almost make the right decision, early on in the story, where they have him writing a letter to Robb before burning it, because that shows that the potential is there for goodness. And And so it's all the more tragic, I think, when we see these characters who are capable of making good decisions, but ultimately succumb to their darker instincts.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that Gollum is kind of a unique character. I really do think that in terms of literature, in terms of fantasy literature, he is a one of one. You can draw parallels to other characters, in these stories like Aragorn, to other fantasy, reluctant kings, even to Frodo and Sam, but and Gandalf, of course. But Gollum, like there's never been another character exactly like Gollum. There are characters who have elements of it. You just mentioned Theon. Theon definitely takes on a little bit of that servile role with Reek, my name is Reek elements of it. But in that case, it's coming as a result of direct physical torture as opposed to the same.
This may have been the first time I actually ever drew like that connection, because I don't, maybe subconsciously I had before, but in any case, it's still a completely different thing.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. There's never really been another Gollum. He's such a unique creation in literature.
Yeah, and it's part of the function of the story, but also just a testament to the incredible character that J.R.R. Tolkien created. And George R.R. Martin has, even though he has been, sometimes pushing back against certain elements of Tolkien's legendarium, specifically the whole, what was Aragorn's tax policy and all that idea. But he clearly has immense reverence and love for Tolkien, and it influenced his work, if not in terms of direct allegory, but in terms of character elements and character journeys. And to that end, I forget where I first heard this observation, because I want to give it due credit, but I can't remember. If someone remembers where it originally came from, please let me know. But when it comes to the end of Game of Thrones, something that we both like, and the way that it was interacted with, one of the things that really I just went yes when I heard it was when someone pointed out that people wanted Jon to be Aragorn, when in reality Jon was Frodo. And when I heard that, I'm like, that sounds like something to me that, however you want to interpret how it was realized, that seemed like something George R. R. Martin would 100% do, because the ending that Frodo gets in this movie, and in the book as well, but in this movie specifically, that is really, to me, what sets this movie apart from other kinds of traditional fantasy, endings, because this is not a triumphant ending for Frodo. It's an incredibly bittersweet, where we heard that word before, ending, because the idea that you could do everything that Frodo did and save the world effectively and make it back home, and that's still not enough, because everything that you went through in the end still has left its mark on you, is an incredibly powerful and tragic idea. And it's heartbreaking by design, the idea that, as Frodo says, there are some things that time cannot mend, some hurts that go too deep, that have taken hold, because that's not something that we want to believe. We want to believe that Frodo and anyone who has suffered such trauma can fully recover from it. But in some cases that it's not actually possible, that to, not have a full and enriching life, but to go back to being the same person that we once were. And the way that Tolkien chooses to visualize that, especially with the idea that a new age is dawning, and that it will be the age of men, but that means that some people who came before, like the elves, will, they've had their time, they will now depart. And for Frodo as well, it's an astonishingly powerful and beautiful idea. And Frodo crystallizing it at the end when he says, we set out to save the Shire, Sam, and it has been saved, but not for me. And but it has been saved, and it will be saved, as for Sam and those who follow. It's the reason that this movie leaves me in a puddle of tears at the end when I watch it.
I will say, like, it's, and that's why, like, I've never been able to take criticisms of the ending seriously, because, like, everything is very purposeful with the way that this film resolves, and you do need to take that time to really deal with the emotional fallout for Frodo of everything that's happened. And I swear, as I get older, those words of there is no going back. There are some things that time cannot mend, some hurts that go too deep. Like I've I read the story and saw the films when I was in my late teens, and I don't think that I was capable of understanding the gravity of what's being communicated there. As I've gotten older and gone through some things, I very much am, and I just think that'll be the case as as more years pass and I spend those years with this film. I think I'm going to be reduced to more and more tears when the ending of this film comes around, because it's just something that I think really rings true as you go through more of your life. I did want to scroll back up on the comments a little bit, because I don't want you to think that we were ignoring you, Lady Starfall, because I did notice you were asking a question about the years of filming. It wasn't quite 10 years. I think they officially started filming in 99. So it was only about 4 years. But I think they'd been in pre-production on the film since 97. Mm-hmm. So it was still a good number of years. Much more than is spent, on most film productions. And they had to start planting the gardens in Hobbiton, a couple of years before before they even started filming. Which I'm still, like, I've been trying to plan my trip to New Zealand. It's going to happen one of these days.
Yeah, my sister Logan has done the Lord of the Rings tour of New Zealand, and been to Hobbiton and done the horseback rides and everything. And she says she wants me to go with her, and I'm like, that's absolutely, as soon as I can find the time and the financial wherewithal, because that's a bucket list item for sure.
Yeah, and I get jealous of people, my friends who have already gone. I was supposed to go with Aaron, like, I think last year or something, and unfortunately it actually was supposed to be the beginning of this year. Unfortunately, the real reason why it didn't happen is because I procrastinated on planning for it and making the right phone calls and such. But it ended up being a good thing, because then I lost my mom, and I would not have been in a good place to enjoy that. I mean, in some ways, maybe it would have been healing, but also I don't think I would have enjoyed it. I'd rather go when my heart's in a good place, and I think I've even talked to my godmother about her and I going, now that she's seen the films, because she said that she'd like to share that with me. So we'll see if that comes to fruition, maybe. Yes, it is very beautiful, and so far, and welcome 8984M. So glad to see you. I was hoping some people would see the message over in the Discord over at Force Center. But yes, so okay, so before I dissolved into sadness, what were we talking about?
Well, we were just talking about the end and the whole
Yeah.
there's some things time cannot mend idea. I will just say on the comment about the endings, just to address it because it's a jokey criticism gets leveled all the time. Yes, this movie has technically multiple endings. It really doesn't. It has one ending. It has the true ending. It has the same ending as the book. Because if you really think about, like, when you go through all the different things that people consider endings, if you cut it off there, the movie is lesser for it. It's really just people like, oh God, this movie's so long. When's it going to end? It's like, but like do you want to end it right after Frodo and Sam destroy the ring? No, then you don't get the literal return of the king. You need to, like, you have them getting rescued. You have them get the Fellowship reuniting, which is essential. Then
Well,
you have
and here's the thing. I do see, like, Frodo and Sam on the rock, and
Yeah.
you know, after the destruction of the ring. I see that as the ending of, quote unquote, the return of the king, and everything that comes after that is the epilogue to the Lord of the Rings overall.
Yeah. Well, I might disagree slightly.
Yeah,
I agree with
you know what? You're
principle.
right.
I think that that's a moment where that could theoretically have ended, but I think the first time you can make an actual serious argument that they could have ended the movie there was after Aragorn is crowned, and you get the "my friends, you bow to no one" moment at Minas
And plus,
Tirith.
that is technically the return of the king.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
you probably would need to include that.
Yeah. So that to me is the first moment when you could really make a demarcation. I consider everything after that to be the epilogue, and then yes, theoretically you could have ended it at the Grey Havens, but like at that point you're so close. Go all the way, get the final scene with Sam.
And it was really important for them to end with Tolkien's ending.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Philip Aboyan's joked, whatever other sins we've committed, we should at least end it the way Tolkien did. And
yeah, and I alluded to it earlier. The fact that, like, for some people there aren't enough endings because the movie, by necessity of the cinematic form, effectively omits the scourging of the Shire, which is thematically important and powerful in the book. And I would love to have seen it, but I also get that when you end the movie when you literally save the world, it's kind of hard to reconcile the scale of the scouring of the Shire afterwards. But and plus it would have added another half an hour onto the movie that people, I'm sure the people who aren't as
and
big
plus
into the
the scouring of the Shire for me is, and I know it's very important to a lot of people, and it's very important to me in terms of the book story. But that is definitely probably the most that may be the most egregious example of Tolkien breaking narrative conventions, because nobody would do that. And truth be told, even though I accept the book as the book, and I would never in my life second guess Tolkien. He's telling the story that he tells, and so the Scouring of the Shire is part of that. So I accept it and love it. And that's the book. That said, I've never really been upset about the decision to leave it out of the film, because I think, and look no further than the complaints that the film did get from the people who claim there were too many endings. Can you imagine the reaction if the Scouring of the Shire was left in after the big, huge climax of the destruction of the ring, and then, oh no, there's more to come. Saruman has taken over the Shire, and the hobbits need to have this one last little adventure to reclaim it. And somehow it works in the book. But I remain convinced that it would have been a bad decision to make it part of the film. Unless, I think the only way you can do the Scouring of the Shire is if you make The Lord of the Rings as, and it remains to be seen if maybe we end up getting this someday. But if it's made as a television series or miniseries, then you could have, the penultimate episode be the big grand finale of the destruction of the ring, or the return to Gondor and all that, and then have the final episode be the return to the Shire. And now there's this in that episodic format. I think it could work, but not as a film.
No, I have seen, Tolkien purists who have complained about it, and even though I understand their frustrations, I have yet to see a single person who has managed to make a coherent argument for how the Scouring of the Shire could have been incorporated into a filmed version of The Lord of the Rings. If it's out there, send it my way. I'd love to read it. But I do think that it's an interesting form of the fact that, like, the thematic power of it is the idea that even the Hobbit's home was not safe, and Saruman comes back and tries to ruin it in his small meme way because he's been depowered. But there's its own kind of different beauty in the idea that they make it back to Hobbiton, and it is still as idyllic as it once was. And so that theoretically that could have made it easier for Frodo to pick up the pieces of his old life, as he says. But the fact that he still can't really, I think, underscores the thematic power of the ending as written that they kept preserved. So I'm glad that it's the way it is. And if we needed to, if we want to read The Scouring of the Shire, then we either have to read the book or we have to see if they ever adapt it as a TV series. I do like that they, at least in the extended cut, they do give us Saruman's end as faithfully depicted from the book in the extended cut of Return of the King, specifically with Wormtongue being the one who kills him. And although you could argue that's Legos' arrow in the fall from the tower that finishes him, but just it was always one of the things that, as much as I dearly love the theatrical cut, the fact that they trek all the way to Isengard to see like Saruman, and then they get there and Gandalf's just like, he's fine there, just leave him there, which is what happens in the book. But then, of course, in the book, Saruman gets released and he goes to the Shire. So the fact that, and you can actually see it in the theatrical cut where they pull back in that wide shot, and then there's some voiceover again of like, and there Saruman must remain under your guard, Treebeard. And you're like, yeah, I get you. And you watch the extended cut, and it's because in the extended cut, they go to, and they show Saruman, and because they came to him for information, and he is another one who does not repent, and ultimately has been so twisted by his desire for power in the ring that there's no way back for him. And the fact that it's his treatment of Wormtongue that does him in is a very thematically satisfying end for his character. So
and I think it was 8984M just commented about how tough it is to adapt Tolkien, and that right there is a prime example of well, let's see, we've got this big battle between the humans and the orcs in book 2. Well, obviously we have to make that big, and we've got to, if you have this big huge battle in the second book, it makes narrative sense in a modern cinema to make that the big climax of the film. But there's still more stuff after that. Well, I guess we'll push that to the third book. But then also the stuff with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum and Shelob is happening at the same time as that stuff. So, we got to push that into film 3 too. And then you get to film 3, and it's like, well, the scene with Saruman, doesn't really work is the beginning of the third film, because it's confronting the villain of the second film. Well, I guess we're gonna have to lose lose it. It just shows like that, like making sure that you're adapting something so it'll work in cinema, but also then it causes that ripple effect of causing other problems. And so I have not envied their task, and in the way they had to adapt these stories, and I think they did a remarkable job. I know that as far as that Saruman scene in Return of the King, I think that the writers even said that they're not sure how well they pulled it off, because to them it still felt like it was wrapping up film 2 instead of starting film 3. But because we all kind of now see this as one large film, so I actually think it works beautifully in terms of it does two things. It wraps up Saruman's arc from the rest of the trilogy, but also it does set up character arcs and story elements for Return of the King. It sets up stuff with Aragorn, with Theoden, and even Gandalf, and so I think they were being a little hard on themselves, but I also understand why they cut it down, because I think they were so nervous about making a wrong step, or like giving in too much to like being too self-indulgent with the third film, because they knew that they had to knock it out of the park. So I get it, but I'm glad it's all back in there.
Yeah, I think they handled it about as well as they possibly could have. For the reasons that you're saying as well, like the fact that within that extended scene with Saruman, we get set up specifically, I think, for Theoden's arc, and the idea that Saruman mockingly calls him the lesser son of greater sires, which really kind of underscores his feelings of inadequacy, given the fact that it was in many ways Aragorn who led the victory at Helm's Deep as opposed to Theoden himself. But then that ties beautifully into the idea that Theoden also, like Aragorn, rises to meet his own moment, and it culminates in that absolutely outstanding scene that we alluded to earlier with the charge of the Rohirrim, which if I ever need a single scene to watch to like pump me up and like hype me up for something, this is the scene I go to, because it just, the way that you see Theoden give the speech with, and then you see the sun rising behind the Rohirrim.
Look at that!
I know, it's one of the most beautiful shots in the history of movies, as far as I'm concerned. And the way the speech, like everyone rightly lauds Aragorn's speech at the Black Gates at the end of the movie. I think Theoden's speech, even if it's not as verbose, is almost as good, because when he is like yelling like a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises.
I feel the opposite. I feel the opposite. I feel like Aragorn's speech might not be up there with Theoden's, but he still does a great job. I think Theoden has
because Theoden's is a little bit more structured with the weight of the cinematic craft behind it. Specifically, I think of the moment when, after he's finishing his speech, he raises his sword and he starts yelling "death," which at first, when I first heard it, I didn't know he was yelling death. I just thought he was yelling. But now hearing that he's yelling death makes it all that more potent, because he starts yelling death, and then his men echo him, and he yells it again, and his men echo him. And then specifically when he yells it the third time, and then you see Merry draw his sword and yell it too, and then you see Éowyn draw her sword and yell it too. And as like this kind of the slow-mo, and then it pulls back, and like I'm getting teary just thinking about it. I'm like, if you can't feel something watching this scene, you're dead inside, because holy mother of God, this is like so
and this is the point where if Erin is watching this, or if she watches it later, she is screaming at the top of her lungs at me right now, because she's like, John, how are you not just talking wall to wall about Howard Shore and the Hardanger fiddle? uh, okay, so this is the part where I'm going to break out in my love affair for Howard Shore. And if you want me to go on and on more about Howard Shore, go back and listen to that 4.5-hour stream of Return of the King from a couple of years ago, because I think Aaron's actually on that too. But yeah, like Howard Shore is just like, I don't think he's necessarily like, if I had to rank my composers, like my favorite composers, he's not number one on the list. For me, I know for a lot of people it's John Williams. He's really up there too. For me, it was always James Horner for me. But Howard Shore crafted, like, and I know I'm going to get some pushback because I know Star Wars is up there for a lot of people, but I think this is the most stunning musical score ever crafted in cinema, just because it's so breathtakingly like gorgeous and operatic, and the amount of themes, oh my god, there are too many themes to count, which I'm going to do a plug now. If any of you watching haven't seen my interview with Mr. Doug Adams, author of the music of the Lord of the Rings films, go check it out. Because it was like 3 hours long, and I let him just go on and on about the themes, the music, his relationship working with Howard Shore, all that stuff. Definitely check it out. It's a must watch. It's the best thing I've ever done. But just like it's so beyond astonishing, and especially this moment at the Pelennor Fields, the charge of the Rohirrim, the way that Rohan theme comes in, but first we get the music that's associated with the Ents, and it's called Nature's Reclamation, which it was used for both the Ents and the big charge at the end of the Two Towers. So here once again it's brought in for the Rohirrim, and almost like there's this synergy between the two forces. Maybe because of their proximity, or because or just because it sounds great. But we get that beautiful, theme picking up as we get that super wide shot, and then as soon as the charge starts, it's that Rohan theme with the fiddle, and then the heavy brass comes out, and it's just like chills, up and down my spine. Seeing this in the theater, and I just remember, like, especially that final shot once they charge into the orcs, and it's like this panoramic, like the camera moves around just as the Rohirrim are riding into the orcs, and I remember being like, I've never seen anything like this in cinema, and still it's beyond so many other things, and the music just is so much a part of that, and honestly, this, like, probably part of the reason why I haven't talked about the music before this is because then it just overtakes the whole conversation. But we could list all the thematic work. I think the Into the West theme from this film is just one of the absolute highlights that doesn't really come in until first. We did a little bit of it when Gandalf and Pippin are talking during the battle about, if death, is coming for them, Gandalf, offers, some comforting words of what lies beyond death. And then we get it in really full force when Sam picks up Frodo and carries him. And then, of course, it comes back in during the Grey Havens, and then into the end credits with Annie Lennox's beautiful song Into the West. And these were the movies where, like, that kind of started my whole thing of, no, we have to sit here through the entire credits because I have to hear all the music. So Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that final the End of the West track, and also Annie Lennox's Oscar-winning song "Into the West" is like that. If I ever need to put on a song and like guarantee that I'm gonna tear up, like that's a go-to for me, because it just is such a beautiful, haunting track that perfectly pairs with the emotions of the movie. And I love it. I love it so much, and I just think that for you know for Howard Shore, he this it like the fact that he composed the music for all three of these movies and found a way to just make it into an art form in and of itself is another thing people don't talk enough about. Like, even though as beloved as the music of these movies is rightly acclaimed as it is, like, this is one of the single greatest film scores ever. So
It's
and
something that stands like on its own as well too. Like I've said it before, and I firmly believe it, that that Howard Shore's The Lord of the Rings as a piece of music is an adaptation of Tolkien's work itself.
Yeah. Like,
even outside of the films. And the 3-time Grammy winner, each year for each of these scores. Fellowship and Return of the King won Oscars for Best Score, also Best Song for Into the West. It's unparalleled. And like I said before, I mentioned the number of themes. The folks, if you don't have that book that I mentioned, the music of the Lord of the Rings films, like, you need to get it. Just even if there's some sections that might go over your head a little bit with when it's talking about certain things with relation to music theory, although they make it pretty reader friendly. But you'll just be gobsmacked by the amount of themes that are in these films, and the variations on themes, and the way those themes are intermingled with other themes. And it's watching Aragorn's theme change over the course of the films until ultimately it's mixed in with the Gondor theme in the third film. And it's just, and I love the way that the Gondor theme itself pops up at the Council of Elrond when Boromir stands up, and it's just the softer kind of tune on just like a horn that's very slight, but it's beautiful. And then come Return of the King, when Gandalf and Pippin are riding up to Minas Tirith, and it's this big, gigantic, brassy fanfare that's just it's just amazing. And I wanted to say hello, welcome, the General Grievous 19. Welcome to the stream. We're about to we'll be wrapping up soon because we're almost hitting the 3-hour mark. But we're very happy that you're able to pop in and join us. Which again, he just said happy 20th anniversary. That's what this whole stream has been about. But how are you feeling about the fact that it's been 20 years, Jared?
I mean, I feel like whenever somebody brings it up, like, oh my God, it's been 20 years, it's used as a code for, oh my God, I feel old, which, if that's your reaction, then, yeah. But like, for me, it's a little bit more of an idea of like, I've loved this movie for so long that it feels like it's always been a part of my life, even though I lived the first 12 years before Fellowship, and I guess 14 before Return to the King without it. But like, so seeing the anniversary for me, it's more like, oh, it's been that long that I've had this piece of my life that I really can't imagine my life without at this point, because these movies have been so influential on something that I love this much, which is movies in general, and so that, like, having that kind of commemorative mark kind of just serves it's a mark of the passage of time, but it's also just kind of reaffirmation of the fact that yes, these movies happened, and they have made my life better, and I am just always grateful for the opportunity, one, to rewatch them, and two, to just reinforce just how special they are, both with what they mean to me and with what a gift they were to the world, essentially, and to anyone who loves fantasy stories as we do, because it is just it's just such a triumph. And there's a reason that we celebrate anniversaries. It's because it was a monumental event that we want to keep commemorating. And I don't necessarily feel like I'm like, oh, I wish I could go back to 2003 and watch this movie for the first time. I'm like, I feel ready to watch this movie again right now and have experienced the same joy that I felt then. So that's kind of where the 20 years come from.
I don't know. I wouldn't mind going back to visit.
I wouldn't mind for other reasons, like the fact that my back might hurt a little bit less. But in terms of the movies are right there.
Although I say that, like 2003, okay, because I was out of high school by that point, but not 2001, because even though I had a lot of joy associated with the first movie coming out, there's some stuff in high school that I don't want to relive. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I was just thinking about this the other day, and for a long while now, I've thought that I was getting really grouchy about getting older. And things like this serve to remind me of that. But, I'm still on the young side. So I don't think it's like getting upset about getting physically older, but it's more, I've started to notice that like the really lamentable thing about, the passage of time is that you get further away from those really great memories and experiences that you remember so fondly. And so, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't want to go back permanently, but I wouldn't mind like revisiting some moments and the excitement of like when these films were coming out, and because it was just one of the most special times of my life. Just, and like I was saying before, it's almost impossible to describe to people, especially I feel like the landscape now of cinema has just changed so much. And the world has changed too, the way we communicate with each other. It's just the experience of these movies coming out in, each year, one right after the other, 2001, 2002, 2003, to the point where it was like this nonstop, like build up and hype about Lord of the Rings. It was something else. And it makes me kind of, to talk about another film series, it actually makes me really envious of the people who lived through the Star Wars trilogy coming out. Because I'm like, yeah, I can watch all these documentaries about what America was like at the time, what the world was like at the time, and people, and the excitement of people lining up, for blocks around, around cinemas. But I have a feeling that there's no way I'll be able to understand probably what it was like for people, to go through that, except maybe that I had a, potentially comparable experience with these movies. And I think that's what I value so much about this, is because I got to experience something that was very special. Yeah. And I don't take that lightly. And that's why, I think I need to stop being a little less cynical about like sort of newer phenomenons, because, everybody knows I've been grouchy on occasion about things like the MCU and stuff like that, but there are experiences that younger viewers are having with certain other movies or movie series that in 20 years they're going to be like, man, I was there for that. And and so yeah, and I think even we're going to see that for people who will be saying that about the Star Wars sequel trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
as much as certain elements of that have been derided by, because also you and I were also around for the prequel trilogy. And while I would say that doesn't come up to the experience that I had with Lord of the Rings, but there's still something very special about remembering what it was like when those films were coming out, and to go to, I didn't make it opening night, but I was there the opening week for The Phantom Menace, and just the experience of there's never been a new Star Wars in my lifetime, and how amazing that was, and seeing a packed theater, and even in the days before I got to see it, listening to people who had seen it, and listening to reactions and stuff. So stuff like that, and the experience I had with these films, which was so beyond anything else. I'm just very grateful that I had that experience in my life, and that I'll continue to have those memories to cherish. And that's before you even get to the films themselves, which are like, I would say they're like a warm blanket.
Yeah.
And they're an old friend. I felt this way about a specific moment in the first film. And I'm sure I've said this before. Probably because I had finished reading the books before I saw the movie. So this moment rang true in this way a little bit for me, but especially now, over 20 years on from that. It's when the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, the Concerning Hobbits sequence, when Gandalf and Frodo are on the cart, and Frodo's getting off the cart, and he says to Gandalf, "Well, Gandalf, I'm glad you're back." And then Gandalf just softly says, well, first he says, "So am I, Frodo," and then to himself softly he says, "So am I." And every time I watch that moment, I'm like, yes, I'm so happy to be back. And it feels like coming home every time.
That's a great way to phrase it, because these movies, being timeless but also of a very specific time, it creates a certain kind of feeling that, at least for me at my age, and it sounds like for you at your age, it's an experience that's not necessarily able to be replicated, because for like, we consume movies differently now. We just do. And social media and online interaction has in some ways been great because it fosters community. You and I are friends because we bonded over one of the movies online. But it's hard to deny that there's also a strong negative component to it, in terms of the way that people have become a little bit more, pack-minded and hypercritical, and like there's an economy to tearing these things down. And that kind of discourse has infected other things that I've loved, including it got to Game of Thrones, it got to definitely the Star Wars sequel trilogy, but even before that, with what's fascinating is the prequel trilogy came out at around the same time. Phantom Menace was a couple years before Fellowship. Attack of the Clones was the same year as The Two Towers, and then Revenge of the Sith was 2 years after Return of the King. And even though I was consuming those movies around the same time, in that case, while I was watching those movies, I was loving them, but the discourse kind of retroactively had a negative impact on my experience, even though I always loved those movies, just because you couldn't go anywhere without hearing some obnoxious loudmouth jerk ranting about how much they'd sucked and ruined his or her childhood. And so I always kind of resented that my experience had to be tainted because of that kind of attitude. And what's kind of remarkable about the Lord of the Rings films is that the time that they came out in 2001, 2002, 2003, that kind of era was still just burgeoning, and I wasn't plugged into it as much. So these movies are one of the last type of their kind that I experienced almost entirely free of that level of discourse. There were some elements to it, like I was going online to like the onering.net and viewing, but it wasn't the same thing because my experience with these movies was my experience with these movies, and it became so ingrained in my heart that by the time I got to, engaging with the rest of the world about the movies and saw things that might have retroactively hurt, my relationship with at least the conversation around them, these movies were a North Star for me that could not be touched. And so that doesn't mean they can't be criticized, but that like my experience with them will always be my experience. And it's now forever beyond the reach of anyone who ever might try to take it away from me, which is an ideal I still strive towards with other franchises, specifically with Star Wars. And but these movies, I don't know if I could have had those experiences with that experience with these movies, even if they were exactly the same, had they come out even 10 years later, let alone 20. And so I'm very glad in that respect that these movies came out when they did, because it allowed them to just be the Lord of the Rings for me. And now that will forever be in my heart.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like Star Wars at the time was a bit unique because it very much had that fan culture was more fully developed. So you had I remember there were the message boards on the force.net, which were big. They had all kinds of different subforums and stuff. And I remember when I spent time on there, and I'm pretty sure that those message boards ruined my experience of Attack of the Clones. Just because of all the negativity surrounding the prequels on there. And also the script for Attack of the Clones had leaked out prior to the movie coming out, and I, like a dumbass, had scrolled through it. I will never understand why I did that. So I didn't know every beat of the movie, but there were definitely some things that got ruined for me. And the Lord of the Rings fandom was still developing to the point where there was the onering.net, but I wasn't a quote unquote permanent resident of that message board. I got my start talking with other Lord of the Rings fans. There used to be this old website, which before, this shows how far back it was called Coming Attractions, where it gave you news scoops of projects in development, because there wasn't Twitter and all this other stuff where you could follow productions of movies. This was a website where from all these different sources they'd compile and they'd mark certain things as rumor or whether something was verified, and there were message boards, and one of those subforums was a Lord of the Rings message board, and it was quite compared to things nowadays, it was a very small community. And there were people on there who were book purists, but you kind of just rolled your eyes at them and were like, oh, they're going to be, book purists, they're going to purist. But so much of the response to these movies was so overwhelmingly positive that I felt like even if there was negative noise, it was it was canceled out just by my own enthusiasm for the films and the fact that they had been such an overwhelming success, and audiences loved them, critics loved them, the Academy was showering them with even if it took them 3 years to give it Best Picture, like Fellowship got 13 nominations and 4 wins, and Two Towers got 6 nominations and 2 wins, and so it was. So I was just on so much on cloud 9 for these movies that nothing was going to ruin the experience, and so yeah, it's like, so that's you could probably pick out the beginnings of where the fan culture would eventually go, and to the point where now, the Tolkien fandom has its own really bad elements, but back then it just felt blissful, and to where you could tune out the stuff that that you didn't really care to hear, and just enjoy all the enthusiasm and the euphoric feelings that the films were giving you, and in a way that Star Wars, that it just wasn't there for Star Wars, because I think the Star Wars fandom was very much the first to kind of fall to that sort of the quote unquote toxic fandom, as we call it. And so yeah, it's I wouldn't have wanted to have that experience at any other time, because it was just so special that it felt like I was sharing it with people who also loved it, but in a lot of ways it was still very personal. It was still mine to hold on to.
Yeah. So, yep. Alongside Ben-Hur, and also I believe Titanic also won 11. But
but Return of the King is the only one of the 3 for which it was a clean sweep, which is a special note.
Indeed. Yeah. No. So I'm sure, like, if we want to continue the conversation about like how the changing landscape of media around these movies and the fandom
that could be
experience. I was going to say we actually will have an opportunity to do that probably when we talk about the Hobbit movies, because those movies came out like a full decade later, and for many reasons what ended up being a different experience. Still positive for me in many respects, but definitely some of the elements that I alluded to earlier crept in there as well. And what I would say about that is just the fact that the Lord of the Rings trilogy, such as it stands right now, and specifically this movie, Return of the King, like the fact that it is probably the only trilogy or films like that to me that like it has passed into Valinor, because like nothing can touch these movies for me. Like even fun debates about like, oh, they could have done this differently or whatever. Like I don't have any of the like malice or frustration about it, that I do with some of the other things. I don't feel like I'm personally under attack. I just have a very like zen quality about it, because it's just like these movies to me are perfect. And
that's the thing. I've remarked upon this before. It's a very unique phenomenon with me and like film discussion, is like I have a problem, and it's that I take things very personally. And so if somebody attacked something that I like, it takes all of my willpower to not freak out. And oh my God, has it taken willpower when it comes to Game of Thrones? You know this well, Jared. But and this may have not been true for the first couple of years that Lord of the Rings was out, because I was probably in my defensive mode at the time too. But in the years since, and especially now, they have such a like status, and they have been so solidified to me as just these, like, even if, like I've said before, I acknowledge that there are like individual small flaws throughout the three films if you really want to pick out the movies, but they're perfect to me in a different way, where like taken as a whole, they're just so beautiful and astonishing, and if you can do better, I'd like to see you try. You know, and like they are, for me, they'll always be like taken together my number one film of all time. That's just for me, and like it's been that way since the films came out. And so when somebody takes a shot at these films now, I'm just like, what are you doing? I'm like, okay, you be you, I guess. But it doesn't faze me in the slightest, because I'm like, these movies can't be touched. They're completely safe from all harm, because it's like, how much more could these movies have possibly proved? You know, and there's such, you know, it's like the pinnacle of cinema for me. And I realize maybe that's a grandiose claim for other people, and they're like, oh, come on. But for me, like, this is what cinema is all about, and nothing in the 20 years since has been able to top it. So it's more like a very like curious hilarity of how I take criticism of these movies. Like, and I'm not talking about like little things like what Padar was saying, was like, well, I don't like this. But if you're taking an actual shot at the movies, like this here sucks, my reaction is just going to be bemusement, because I'm like, okay. So, and I don't know that I can say that about any other movies, because like I said, I have this problem where I do take things personally, but this is like a whole nother thing. Lord of the Rings for me is just perfection.
Yeah. I think it's hard to leave it on a higher note than that, because I fully agree. These movies are these movies are cinema at its finest, as you said, and like specifically for what I love about movies, and the idea that, like, you know, movies are supposed to thrill us, they're supposed to transport us, they're supposed to break our heart, they're supposed to make us feel alive. Like, these movies do all of that for me and so much more. And so I just feel like whatever happens to them in the future when we revisit them, you know, 5 years down the line for the 25th or the 30th or whatever, these movies will always be right here for me. And so I just will treasure that experience forever, as I treasured it then. And I just feel like we can't say, I can't express enough of my gratitude that these movies happened. And so I feel like, just thank you to Peter Jackson, thank you to the entire cast, thank you to the entire crew, thank you to J.R.R. Tolkien, who gave us the original story. It's like your work will truly live on forever.
And there, you know, we're going to go ahead and wrap up now, and we're actually going to hit the runtime of the theatrical cut right on the mark. But I do want to say, we, by all means, even at, you know, 3 hours and 20 minutes, did not touch upon nearly enough on this film. There's a reason why the stream that I previously did for this went like 4.5 hours, and I think we focused more on the movie in that stream. It's because there's so much, you know, we didn't touch on characters, like even though she just has a little bit in this movie, but Galadriel, I didn't talk about Arwen enough, Elrond, Um, you know, we could have talked more about Legolas and Gimli, and even though we did mention it a bit, but you know, like we didn't talk about their beautiful drinking game, which is great. The stuff with Merry and Pippin and their, you know, storylines with Theoden and Denethor, and
Yeah.
and
Theoden and Eowyn, I would have loved to talk for like in almost 45 minutes about them and their relationship alone.
and honestly, I feel like you and I probably owe ourselves like actual like one-on-one film discussions of that are not related to anything like outside of the films themselves, but like the whole trilogy, and diving deep into character arcs and stuff like that. So there's nothing to say we won't still do that at a future point for the whole trilogy. But like I said, if there was a, you know, something that we didn't get to and discuss, that annoyed any of you watching, like I said, check out my other stream on this. I had a lot of amazing guests, and I'm sure we covered a lot more as it relates to character arcs. But yeah, I'll just run through. I'll just because I love all these people, so I just need to read out all their names. God bless you all: Elijah Wood, Viggo Mortensen, Sean Bean, Dominic Monaghan, Sean Astin, Ian McKellen, John Rhys-Davies, Orlando Bloom, Billy Boyd, Ian Holm. Let's see, Liv Tyler, Hugo Weaving, Kate Blanchett, Andy Serkis, Brad Dourif, Lawrence McCory, you know, Bruce Spence, Christopher Lee, you know, and there's so many more. John Noble, Carl Urban, Miranda Otto, David Wenham, Bernard Hill. I was just watching Titanic, and I always love seeing Bernard Hill as Captain Smith. Oh God! And of course, you know, all the wonderful people behind the scenes of these movies: Alan Lee, John Howe, Nyla Dixon, Richard Taylor, Jim Rydell, Andrew Lesney, may you rest in peace, as well as Sir Christopher Lee, Howard Shore, created the greatest musical score of all time, and of course, producers, Barry M. Osborne, and oh God, who was his name's not listed here. I'm forgetting one of the producers who worked for New Line, who was like, oh God, I can't. Right, he did so much, but maybe it'll come to me later. But of course, you know, Philippa Boyens, Fran Walsh, Peter Jackson. You guys, you're not watching this, but I owe you so much. I love all the work that you did. And of course, you know, can't leave out Professor J.R.R. Tolkien. Thank you for leaving us with an absolutely incredible legacy. Mark Ordesky, that's the producer I was thinking of. He really spearheaded a lot between Peter Jackson and the executives at New Line. So, you know, can't forget him. So, yeah, I read out all those names because I love all these people so much. And if you don't know who those people are, watch the documentaries on the extended DVDs. Because, oh my God, speaking of which, yes, I've got it right here. And I guess we'll close out. We went a couple minutes over the theatrical cut. Oh, well.
Well, yeah. Well, I would say, you know, we could cry a little bit more about, you know, the everything we didn't get to talk about, but the nature of an anniversary stream, and this, we kind of have this with Pirates as well, is it's talking a little bit more about the experience and reflecting on the nature of the passage of time with respect to this movie, and less of a plot by plot detail. Although we can have that conversation anytime you like, because I'm crying a little bit over the, you know, a lot of the people I didn't get to, you know, fully celebrate. But as a wise wizard once said, not all tears are an evil. So
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I did want to do with the stream, which was so much of the joy that Lord of the Rings brings me is the memory of seeing these movies and everything that surrounded that experience. And so I kind of did want to capture a bit of that in the stream today and not only talk about the film itself, but we did both. Hopefully in 3.5 hours. You would think that we did a bit of both. But no, I'm happy with the way it went, and this shows that this will not be the last Lord of the Rings discussion we do, because there is so much more to talk about. Thank you for I know today this was kind of last minute, so thank you, Jared, for for agreeing to do this, and thank you, Steb, for coming on for a bit. It was so great to have you on as well, and thank you to our viewers, and I was so happy to see someone new as well. We've never seen you before on here. General Grievous 19, so thank you for popping in. Hope you'll check out some future stuff that we do next, not next week, but the beginning of January when we come back, we'll be talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So we hope you guys will tune in for that. That'll be on Sunday, January 7th at 6 p.m. Eastern. Anything else you want to throw out there before we sign off, Jared?
Just wanted to quote one character, not from these movies, but I think the sentiment is apt when we consider the fact that we're leaving Lord of the Rings, and the Return of the King behind for right now, having not talked about everything we wanted to talk about. But it's there's so much we could say more about these movies that we love, but we'll have opportunities to do that in the future. And as a wise elf once said, we do not say goodbye, we say Namarie.
Namarie.